Welcome to Savage Harry. Today's adventure: what if the Punisher found Harry in the cupboard and trained him to hunt Death Eaters with no mercy? If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now let's begin. Chapter 1: Wrong Door. London rain had a different weight than New York rain. It came down sideways even when the air looked still, and it carried the smell of coal soot and the river. Frank Castle had been in the city 41 hours when the wrong door changed his life and another boy's. The Volkov file had cost him 6 months. A Russian moving anti-tank launchers out of the Croatian black market, routed through a Romanian shipping clerk who took bribes in pounds sterling, terminating at a buyer somewhere in Greater London. Microchip had narrowed it from a postcode to a street, from a street to a house number. The intel had moved through 3 sets of hands before it reached the burner phone in Frank's coat, and somewhere along the way a digit had transposed itself. He stood in Little Whinging at 2:15 in the morning. The rain had paused. A privet hedge ran the length of the road in a clipped, unforgiving line. Identical front gardens, identical green wheelie bins, identical net curtains. The address card in his palm read Number 4. The house in front of him had a small ceramic plaque beside the doorbell that also read Number 4. Frank checked the number stenciled on the curb. Number 4. 2 cars sat in the drive. A teal Vauxhall and a beige Rover. No black sedan, no transit van, no tarpaulin in the back garden where Volkov was supposed to be stockpiling crates. Frank had eyes on for a known associate. He had a description of a man with a gold molar and a left-hand burn. He did not have a Vauxhall. He should have walked away. He didn't. The Punisher's first rule was verify before you breach. The second rule was that the first rule cost you nothing. He walked the perimeter once. Kitchen window above the sink. Living room curtains drawn tight. A garage off to the side with the door slightly raised, an inch of black at the bottom. He crouched, lifted it another 4 inches, looked in. Lawnmower, petrol can, folded camping chairs, no crates, no oil-coated wax paper, no munitions stamp. He should have walked away then, too. Later, when Frank tried to remember what made him keep going, the only honest answer was the cupboard. He had not seen it yet. He could not have known it was there. But he sometimes wondered, in the years that followed, whether something in the architecture of the world had bent itself just slightly, to put him on the right doorstep instead of the wrong one. He picked the back kitchen lock in 11 seconds. The pins were cheap, the cylinder old, and the latch gave with the kind of soft click that died inside its own housing. He stepped into a kitchen that smelled of last night's roast and fabric conditioner. A china dog sat on the windowsill watching him with one chipped ear. A wall clock counted off seconds in a thin, tinny voice. He moved through the ground floor on the balls of his feet. Living room, 3-piece suite in brown velour, a television larger than the mantel could support, a framed photograph of a fat blonde child on a beach. Dining room, oak table, 4 chairs, a vase of plastic carnations. The carpet was a pattern of beige diamonds that swallowed footfalls. He had cleared every room downstairs in 120 seconds, and there was no Volkov in this house. There was no Volkov within a mile of this house. The intel was wrong. He should have left the way he came, locked the back door behind him, and called Microchip from the burner 2 streets over. He did not leave because he saw the cupboard under the stairs. It would have been easy to miss. The hallway was narrow, the wallpaper was the color of weak tea, and the cupboard door sat flush in the paneling with only the bolt to mark it. 2 bolts actually, one at adult eye height, one at the floor, both drawn. Frank stopped. A man develops over a sufficient number of years a registry of small wrong things, the hum of a wire that shouldn't be live, the absence of birds, the bolt on the outside of a child's door. He listened. Upstairs, a man was snoring in a register that suggested too much beer and a deviated septum. A woman beside him made the smaller noise of someone who slept lightly because she expected to. No third breath that belonged to a child. The fat boy on the beach, probably a different room. Frank slid the upper bolt and then the lower bolt, and he opened the cupboard door. A face looked up at him out of the dark. It was a small face, round in the cheek the way children are round before puberty hollows them out. The hair was a black mess that did not yield to combing. The eyes behind a pair of badly mended spectacles were green and held more steadiness than green eyes that small ought to hold. The child was sitting on a pallet of folded blankets. He was wearing a gray t-shirt 4 sizes too large and a pair of shorts that had once been someone else's school PE kit. His left arm was extended along the inside wall of the cupboard, palm flat, the way you brace yourself when you have learned that bracing is useful. Across his ribs, where the t-shirt rode up, was the print of a belt buckle in fading purple and yellow. The shape of the buckle was a fan 4 spokes, the kind a man might buy in a market in Spain and bring home to wear with his cheap brown suit. Frank did the arithmetic in under 3 seconds. "What's your name, kid?" The child considered him. Then quietly and with the diction of a child who had been told to speak clearly when spoken to, "Harry Potter, sir. How old? 6. How long have you been in there tonight, Harry?" Harry tilted his head. "What day is it?" Frank's jaw set in a manner that, if anyone had been able to see it, would have suggested the kind of cold that does not warm up afterward. "Tuesday. Since Sunday after lunch, sir." Frank turned and went up the stairs. He had a 1911 in a shoulder holster and a Walther PPK with a screw-on suppressor in his coat. He drew the PPK on the landing. The carpet on the stairs absorbed everything but the smallest creak of the second from top tread, which he had already noted on his way past. The master bedroom was the second door on the left. He opened it the way you open a door behind which a man is sleeping with a cricket bat, slowly then completely. Vernon Dursley sat up. The duvet slid off a stomach the color of uncooked pastry. His mustache puffed out before his eyes did. He saw the man in the door, registered the gun, and reached for the cricket bat propped against the nightstand without any sequence of thought that involved his wife. Frank watched him. He let him reach. He let him close his fingers around the grip. "Pick it up," Frank said. Vernon picked it up. "Lift it." Vernon lifted it. "Now look at the boy in the cupboard." Vernon did not understand the sentence. His eyes went to the bedside lamp instead, then to the door, then to the woman beside him who had begun to stir. "What, who?" The words were rags he was trying to stitch into a question. "Vernon, dear," Petunia Dursley's voice, raw with sleep, going to gravel and then to fear before her eyes were fully open. Frank shot Vernon Dursley twice in the chest. The PPK with the suppressor made the sound a heavy book makes when you drop it onto a kitchen floor. Twice. The cricket bat fell out of Vernon's hand and rolled under the bed. Vernon went over sideways. The duvet did most of the catching. Petunia ran. She made it as far as the bedroom door. Frank stepped aside to let her see down the landing toward the staircase and the cupboard, and then he caught her by the wrist as she went past and turned her gently to face him. She had a face that had been pretty 30 years ago, a face that had been spending the intervening time becoming sharper and more closed. She looked at the gun. She looked at his eyes. "He's a freak," she said. "He's a freak, and his mother was a freak, and we took him in. We didn't have to take him in." "You bolted him in," Frank said. "He sets the table wrong on purpose. He breaks things by looking at them. He brought a teacher's wig down on her head in front of the entire infant school. We can't, you don't know what he is, you don't know, we're decent people, we pay our council tax, we go to church at Easter." "I know what you are," Frank said. He shot her once. Just once, because she was very thin and the round did everything a round needs to do. She went down beside the door and did not get up. Frank stood there a second, listening. The fat blonde child was sleeping in the next room, and the report through the suppressor and the muffling of the duvet and the carpet had not reached him. Frank checked. He opened the second bedroom and found the boy face down in a heap of stuffed bears with his mouth open and a dental retainer on the bedside table beside an empty bag of Maltesers. Frank closed the door again. He left him where he was. The boy had not bolted a cupboard. The boy was a problem someone else could solve another day. He went back down the stairs. Harry was still sitting on the pallet of blankets with his palm flat against the inside wall. Frank crouched. The PPK was already away. He kept his hands where the child could see them. "You hear all that?" Frank asked. "Yes, sir." "What did you hear?" "3 sounds, sir, like books falling." "You know what those sounds were?" "Yes, sir." Frank looked at him. "Tell me what you think they were." "You shot them, sir." "You scared?" The child considered this carefully. He looked at his palm against the inside wall of the cupboard as if it were a witness whose testimony he wished to consult. "No, sir." "You sad?" "No, sir." Frank watched him for a long moment. There was a thing in the child's eyes that Frank had seen before on his own face in the warped chrome of a foxhole canteen at 17. It was a stillness that comes after a person has stopped expecting anything but the next blow and has begun calculating instead. "You got things in here?" Frank asked. "Things you want to bring?" Harry reached behind the pallet and produced 2 objects. A toy soldier with a broken arm painted brown and a photograph that had been folded and refolded until the crease was tearing through the image. Frank took the photograph carefully. A man with round glasses and unruly hair. A woman with red hair and green eyes. They were smiling at someone behind the camera. The corner of a baby's blanket showed at the bottom of the frame. "Your parents, my mum and dad, sir." "Where are they?" "Dead, sir." "In a car crash. Uncle Vernon says they were drunks." Frank looked at the photograph. The man in it was wearing the kind of suit that did not exist in fashion magazines, with a collar that had not been seen in any English shop window since 1979. The woman wore a small silver pendant on a chain that he could not identify. They did not look like drunks. They looked like 2 people who had no idea how short a time they had left. "They weren't drunks," Frank said. "I don't know what they were, but they weren't drunks." He tucked the photograph into his inside coat pocket beside the burner phone. He handed the soldier back to Harry, and Harry held it the way another child might hold a religious object. "Listen to me, kid. I'm going to take you out of this house tonight. I'm not going to leave you here, you understand?" "Yes, sir. You don't have to come with me. You can go to a police station. I can drive you. I can leave you on the steps of a hospital. Anywhere you tell me, I'll do it. It's up to you." Harry looked at him steadily. There was a slow calculation happening behind the green eyes that did not belong in the head of a 6-year-old. "I'd like to go with you, sir." "Okay," Frank said. "Sir." "Yeah, kid." "Why are you helping me?" Frank did not answer right away. He looked at the boy on the pallet of blankets and the smell of the airing cupboard and the long stripe of belt bruise across small ribs, and he answered the only honest answer he had. "Because somebody should have," he said. "A long time ago, somebody should have." He held out a hand. Harry took it. The hand was small and cold and dry. The grip was firm. They walked out of the cupboard together. In the kitchen, Frank made the boy a sandwich: cheddar, butter, white bread. He found a clean glass and poured it half full of milk. He set both on the counter beside a stool. "Eat that," he said. "Yes, sir." While Harry ate, Frank worked. He found the keys to the Rover on a hook by the door. He went through Vernon's wallet without touching the body's face. He pulled out 320s and a fistful of 5s, all of which he left, and the driver's license and a Barclays card, both of which he took. He went through the kitchen drawers until he found a roll of black bin bags and a box of long matches and a half-empty bottle of kerosene under the sink, behind the bleach. He carried the kerosene upstairs. He worked methodically. He poured it along the upstairs hallway, into the master bedroom, into the airing cupboard, down the stairs. The blonde child he carried, still asleep, out the front door and laid in the back of the Rover on the rear bench seat, fastened in with a seatbelt, with a kitchen towel under his cheek. The Rover went down the drive in neutral, no headlights, and rolled to a stop 40 meters down the road on a gentle slope, pointed in the direction of the police station Frank had clocked on his way in. He left the keys in the ignition and a post-it note on the steering wheel that said in block capitals, "Blonde boy. Age about 6, parents dead, AT number 4. He walked back. In the kitchen, Harry had finished his sandwich. The plate sat on the counter. The glass was appended on a tea towel, drying. The boy had washed up. Frank looked at the plate and the glass and the tea towel and said nothing. He took a long candle out of a bottom drawer where Petunia kept emergency stores for power cuts. He took a sewing pin from a pincushion on top of the microwave. He fixed the pin into the candle 2 inches below the wick. He set the candle in a saucer beside the upstairs landing, on the carpet that had been soaked with kerosene, and he lit it. The candle would burn down for 45 minutes before the flame reached the pin. The pin would tip the candle. The candle would fall. He lifted Harry onto his hip. The boy was lighter than he should have been. He carried him out the back door, through the garden, over a side fence, and through a service alley that emerged onto the next street over, where a hire car waited under a non-functional streetlight that Frank had prearranged not to function. In the car, Harry sat in the front passenger seat with his toy soldier on his lap and a seatbelt across his small chest. Frank started the engine. The dashboard clock said 2:47. "Sir," Harry said. "Yeah, where are we going?" "London, then America." "Will you teach me?" "Teach you what, kid?" Harry looked at the dashboard, then he looked at Frank. The green eyes were patient. "To do what you do, sir." Frank put the car in gear and pulled away from the curb. He did not answer for 2 blocks. Then he said, "We'll see. Eat the apple in the door pocket. You're too thin." Harry ate the apple. Microchip's voice came through the burner, thin and panicked, the way it always did when he was being very competent and trying not to admit it. "Frankie, talk to me. You're an hour late. Volkov turned up dead 2 hours ago in a kebab shop in Waitekapel, Greek mob. He's been dead since maybe last Friday, which means whoever sold you that file was selling you smoke. You there?" "I'm here." "Tell me you're clean." "I'm clean." "Tell me you came out of that house with no exposure." Frank glanced at the boy beside him. Harry had fallen asleep with the toy soldier in his lap and his head against the door. The streetlights of London slid over his face in yellow ribbons. "Define exposure," Frank said. Oh God, Frankie, what did you do?" "I need a passport." "For who?" 6-year-old boy, American name. Frank thought about it. Henry Castle, spelled like the king. Birthday May the 2nd, 1980, New Jersey. Microchip was silent for 3 seconds. "Frankie. You got a problem with it, Micro?" "Number no, give me 12 hours. I can have a clean one in your hand at Gatwick at 1900 tomorrow. Tomorrow. Wednesday. Make it Heathrow, Terminal 3, long stay car park, level 5. Heathrow, level 5, done." "Frankie, yeah, don't ask me what I think of this." "I wasn't going to." "Good, because what I think doesn't matter." Frank ended the call. He drove for 90 more minutes, choosing roads at random the way an old habit chose them for him. Eventually, he pulled into the back lot of a motorway services off the M25 where the lighting was bad and the CCTV pointed at the petrol pumps and nothing else. He killed the engine. He watched the boy sleep. Harry's left hand had closed around the broken arm of the soldier. His right hand had closed around the seatbelt strap. Even in sleep, the body kept hold of things. Frank knew that hold. He had grown up in a household where the hold had been less polite than a belt buckle, and he had outgrown the hold the way a tree outgrows a wire fence. Sometimes the fence stayed inside the tree. He took the photograph out of his coat pocket and looked at it again. The man with the round glasses, the woman with the green eyes. He held it up next to the sleeping face beside him. The eyes were the same. He put the photograph away. The fire on Privet Drive caught the upstairs first, as he had intended. The kerosene fumed along the carpet and the carpet went up like an old curtain. The bedroom doors had been left open. By the time the fire engines reached the scene, at 4:11 a.m., the upper floor of Number 4 was substantially gone, and the petrol tank of the Vauxhall in the drive had ruptured and contributed its own modest fireball to the chimney. The investigating officer wrote in his notebook the words faulty wiring, possibly electrical blanket, in a hand that suggested he had written the same words 7 times before in the same suburban borough that year. The blonde child in the back of the Rover, 40 meters down the road, was found by a milkman at 4:35 a.m. He was still asleep. The post-it on the steering wheel was read with confusion and then with deeper confusion and then handed to a constable who handed it to a sergeant. By 6 a.m. the sergeant had a name and an address for the child's nearest living relative, a Marjorie Dursley in Wiltshire, who took the news with a sound like a kicked dog and then said in a voice that wobbled, "I'll come down for him." "Where do I?" Yes, I'll come down." There was, for 36 hours, a flag in the file that said, "Was there a third child in the house?" Neighbors had mentioned a thin boy with glasses. A school registrar had a name, Harold Potter, age 6, last seen in class on Friday afternoon. Inquiries were made. A search of the burned premises uncovered 2 adult bodies and 1 charred mattress in a cupboard under the stairs, and no remains of a child, but the fire had been very hot in that part of the house, and the search teams disagreed about whether there had been enough heat to render a child's bones unrecognizable. The file remained open and got moved to a folder titled Unresolved Persons, and was 3 years later, when the funding for cold cases was cut, shifted to a folder titled Historical. In a different building entirely, an old man in a long silver beard sat in front of a small instrument on a spindly table and watched a small silver mechanism cease its turning. He sat very still. He sat for 9 minutes, then he stood up and walked to a window and opened it. He whistled a thin, clean note. A red and gold bird came in off the night and landed on a perch beside the window and looked at him with one bright eye. "Find him," the old man said. "Find Harry, wherever he is, find him and bring back word." The bird sat for a moment. Then it cocked its head, the way a bird does when it has heard a question that has no answer in the language it has been asked in, and it flapped once, hesitated, and did not move. The old man placed a hand on his beard and held it there. He looked down at the silver mechanism that had stopped turning. He looked at the bird that had not moved. He said very quietly in the silence of an office that listened to its master, "I see." At 1900 on Wednesday, Frank Castle walked into the Level 5 long-stay car park at Heathrow Terminal 3 with a 6-year-old boy holding his left hand. He stopped beside a silver Vauxhall hire car with a post office sticker peeling off the rear bumper. He bent down at the offside wheel arch and removed from inside the wheel well a small Ziploc plastic bag containing a U.S. passport, a vaccination card, a social security card, and a child's driver's permit for the state of New Jersey that Frank slipped immediately into his coat pocket and intended to dispose of because Microchip occasionally tried to be funny. Frank opened the passport. The photograph inside was a passable likeness of a 6-year-old boy named Henry James Castle, who did not exist anywhere except in the State Department database where Microchip had inserted him at 1300 British Summer Time after a long lunch. "That's me," Harry said, looking at the photograph. "That's you," Frank said. "Henry Castle. You go by Harry, all right? You stick with Harry, that's your name. Henry is just for the passport." "Yes, sir. Stop calling me sir." The boy looked up at him. He thought about it. He said, "What should I call you?" Frank looked down at him. The boy had been awake for 2 days on irregular naps, and the food Frank had put in front of him. He had not cried. He had not complained. He had eaten what was put in front of him and gone to the bathroom when Frank told him to and slept when Frank told him to. He had not asked a single second time why Frank was helping him. Frank said. Frank, Harry said. He tried it. He said it again. Frank. Yeah, or Castle, either one not sir. Frank. Let's go. They flew out of Heathrow on a Pan Am red-eye to JFK with 2 seats in the back of the cabin and a stewardess who fussed over the boy and gave him a plastic pin shaped like a pair of wings, which Harry accepted with a polite smile that Frank watched and noted. The boy was very good at the polite smile. The smile did not reach the eyes. Frank wondered briefly where the boy had learned the smile, and then he wondered more briefly how long it would take to teach him to stop doing it, and then he decided the smile was useful and let it alone. Halfway across the Atlantic in the dim cabin, with the stewardesses asleep on jump seats and the engines a steady rumble, Harry turned his face up to Frank's and asked one question. Frank, yeah, are you a bad man? Frank considered this. He thought about Volkov, who he had not killed but who was no loss. He thought about a man in Naples in 1979 who had not gone home to his wife because of Frank. He thought about a man named Castiglione he had put through a plate glass window because the man had been about to put a child through a plate glass window first. I'm a man who does some bad things, he said, to people who do worse things, you understand? Yes. You don't have to do what I do, you don't have to be what I am, you can be anything you want, school, college, a job in an office, I can put you somewhere safe, a family in upstate New York, a boys' home in Maine run by people I trust, I can do that, I will do that if you say the word anytime, you say the word you're out, no questions. Harry looked at him. The cabin lights made the green of his eyes look like something underwater. I don't want a family in upstate New York, he said. What do you want? The child considered the question with the seriousness of a man 20 times his age signing a contract. He said, finally, I want to learn what you know. I want to know why people like Uncle Vernon get to do things, and I want to know how to stop them. Frank watched him. The engines rumbled. A man 2 rows down began to snore. The stewardess across the aisle turned a page of a paperback. Somewhere over the mid-Atlantic ridge, 10 kilometers below them, a fishing trawler crossed the surface of black water with its lights on and its crew asleep at their stations. All right, Frank said. Okay, kid, all right. He looked out the window at the dark. We start in New York, we start with reading, we start with everything I know about why people like your uncle get to do things, we start slow. You tell me any day you want out, you're out. You understand? Yes, Frank. Good, sleep. Harry slept. The toy soldier with the broken arm was clutched in his left hand against his ribs where the buckle had printed itself. The photograph of the man with the round glasses and the woman with the green eyes sat in the inside pocket of Frank Castle's coat, and Frank Castle did not, for the remainder of the flight, take it out again. He watched the boy sleep. The named emotion that crossed his face for the first and last time on that flight was stillness. He recognized it. It was the face he had worn at 17 in a foxhole and at 23 in a hospital corridor and at 29 over the graves of his own 3. He had worn it so often it had become a thing he had stopped feeling. Tonight, with the boy asleep beside him, he felt it again, and he sat with it, and he did not look away. The 747 set down at JFK at 6:18 in the morning local time, which meant they had landed before they had taken off, and the cabin lights came up on a plane full of red-eyed adults blinking at each other like cattle in a chute. Harry came awake with the controlled blink of a person who had learned in a cupboard that you do not announce that you are awake until you have ascertained the geography around you. He looked at his hands. He looked at the seatback in front of him. He looked at Frank. He sat up. We're in America, he said, not a question, a confirmation of an internally verified fact. We're in America. I've never been in America before. You'll like it. What's it like? Frank considered the question. He thought about the country in the abstract way that men think about their country when they have been in too many other countries and have stopped being able to think about home as a homogeneous thing. He said, it depends on which part. The part we live in is loud. People drive too fast. The food is bigger than it needs to be. They like flags. Okay, Harry said. He took the information the way he took everything as a small, clean fact to be filed. Customs was the part that mattered. Frank had a U.S. passport in the name Frank Castiglione that had cleared 3 previous trips through this gate with no flag, and he walked the boy through the queue with a hand on the back of the boy's neck the way a man does with a child to whom he is related and slightly fond. Harry, asked by the officer how he had enjoyed his trip to London, said the words that Frank had told him to say on the descent. Visiting my aunt, sir. She has a small dog. The dog is called Whiskey. The officer smiled. The officer stamped 2 passports. The officer waved them through. In the taxi rank, in the long line of yellow Crown Victorias under the iron-cold November sky of a New York morning, Frank loaded the boy and the single duffel bag into the back of a cab driven by a Sikh gentleman named Mr. Singh who, when Frank gave the address as 10th and 46th, asked no further questions and put the meter on. Harry looked out the window. The Belt Parkway unfurled past, and then the Verrazano was a gray arch in the distance to the right, and then the BQE, and the boy did not say anything for 40 minutes. He looked. He looked the way someone looks at a country they intend to learn. When they crossed into Manhattan, the boy turned in his seat and put both palms flat on the side window and watched the skyline approach. The buildings were taller than anything in Surrey. The light coming off them was the particular November light of a city built on an island that ran north and south, and the light came in at an angle through the gaps between blocks and lit the side of one building and then the next the way it lights a row of teeth. "Frank," Harry said. "Yeah, is this where we live? For a while. We move around, but yeah, this is where we start." Harry watched. After a moment he said, with the same careful diction he had used in the cupboard, "I like it." Frank said nothing. The cab pulled up at the corner of 10th Avenue and 46th Street outside a 4-story walk-up with a Chinese laundry on the ground floor and a fire escape rusted to the color of an old penny. He paid in cash, tipped the man 20% and helped the boy out of the cab. The duffel went over his shoulder. The boy's small hand went into his free hand. They went up 4 flights of stairs that smelled of old paint and turmeric. At the top, Frank unlocked a steel-faced door with 3 deadbolts and let the boy inside. The apartment was one room with a kitchenette in the corner and a bathroom behind a partition. There was a single mattress on the floor with a wool army blanket folded at the foot. There was a folding chair. There was a card table on which sat a disassembled M1911A1 oiled on a sheet of newspaper. There was on the wall above the card table a road map of the 5 boroughs and a single black pin stuck in the corner of Hell's Kitchen. There was nothing else. Harry stood in the doorway and surveyed it. He took it in the way he had taken in the customs line. He nodded once in acknowledgement of a place that was not yet a home but might become one. "Where do I sleep?" he asked. "The mattress is yours. I sleep on the floor. We'll get you a bed." "Yes, Frank." "You hungry?" "Yes, Frank." "There's an old man on the corner makes pierogi. I'm going to go get pierogi. You stay here. You lock the door behind me. You do not open it for anybody until I come back. You hear knocking. You do not answer. You hear a key in the lock and a voice that says castle. You let it open. Anything else, you go in the bathroom and you lock the bathroom door and you wait. You hear me?" "Yes, Frank." "Repeat it back to me." Harry repeated it back to him verbatim, including the part about the bathroom and the part about not opening the door, and Frank watched his face while he repeated it and saw that the boy was not reciting words but was running through a checklist he had memorized and would not deviate from. "Good," Frank said. He locked the door behind him on the way out. He stood in the stairwell for a moment listening and he heard behind the steel-faced door the click of the 3 deadbolts going home. The boy had done it in sequence, top to bottom, without being told. Frank went down the stairs. He bought pierogi from the old Polish man on the corner who had been selling them out of a steam tray on a rolling cart since 1971. He bought 12. He bought a paper bag of apples from the Korean grocer. He bought a quart of milk and a loaf of bread. He stood on the corner with the pierogi in his hand and looked up at the 4th-floor window with the wire glass and the cracked sash, and he thought for a long moment about the small boy behind the 3 deadbolts. He had killed a husband and wife in a suburb of London 36 hours earlier. He had taken their nephew across an ocean on a forged passport. He had walked the boy through a customs gate with a hand on the back of his neck, and the boy had said the words he had been told to say, in the voice of a child who knew how to take instruction. Frank Castle had for 15 years lived a life predicated on the principle that the men he killed deserved to die, and that the world was, on balance, marginally improved by their absence. He had not in those 15 years ever picked up a child and walked away with him. He stood on the corner of 10th and 46th with 12 pierogi in a paper sack and a quart of milk in his other hand, and he made a small adjustment to the principle. The world, he decided, was marginally improved by the boy in the 4th-floor window being out of the cupboard he had been in. He went back up the stairs. He let himself in with the key and he said the word castle through the door before he turned the handle, and behind the door he heard the 3 deadbolts come back in sequence top to bottom. The boy was standing exactly where he had left him. "I'm back," Frank said. "Yes, Frank, pierogi." "What's pierogi?" "You'll see." They sat on the floor on the wool army blanket and ate the pierogi out of the paper sack with their fingers, and Harry chewed each one slowly, as if he were memorizing it, and Frank watched him eat and did not say anything for the duration of the meal. When the pierogi were gone, Harry wiped his hands on a paper napkin and folded the napkin and set it neatly beside the empty bag, and he looked at Frank and he said, "When do we start?" Frank looked at him. "Tomorrow," he said. "Yes, Frank." The boy did not smile, the boy did not frown. The boy simply received the answer, and lay down on the mattress with the army blanket pulled up to his chin, and the toy soldier with the broken arm clutched against his ribs, and he closed his eyes. Frank sat in the folding chair. He cleaned the 1911 again, although it did not need cleaning because it was something to do with his hands. He listened to the boy breathing. The breathing slowed and deepened in stages. After perhaps 8 minutes, the boy was asleep. Frank Castle sat in the folding chair in the apartment on 10th Avenue and watched the boy sleep. And the named emotion did not return. It sat in his chest, where it had been since the airplane, in the manner of a stone too heavy to lift but too smooth to cut him. Outside, on the street below, a fire engine went past with its siren on, headed east. T Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. The basement on 46th tomorrow began at 5:30 in the morning. Frank woke the boy with a hand on his shoulder. Harry came up out of sleep the way he had come up the morning before, with the controlled blink of an animal that has learned to inventory before it announces. He sat up. The wool blanket folded across his lap. The toy soldier rolled onto the mattress and stayed there. Bathroom, wash your face, then run. Yes, Frank. The boy did all three things in the order given. The bathroom door closed. The bathroom door opened. The boy emerged in the gray t-shirt and the borrowed shorts and stood in front of Frank, waiting for the next instruction. Up and down the stairs to the laundry and back. 6 times, slow on the way down, faster on the way up. Don't look at the doors. If you meet anyone, you smile and you go past. You're a kid going to find your dad in the basement. You don't need help, you don't need anything. Yes, Frank. Harry went down and came back. He went down and came back. The 3rd trip he was breathing hard. The 5th trip he was not breathing through his mouth, which Frank made a note of. On the 6th trip he came through the door and put his palms on his knees and looked up at Frank and did not say a word. Eat. There was a bowl of porridge on the card table beside the disassembled 1911. Harry sat in the folding chair. He ate the porridge slowly. He did not ask for sugar. There was no sugar in the apartment. Today you read, Frank said. Today you start with this one. He set down a small gray-green softcover book on the corner of the table beside the bowl. Cover said FM 23-9 M16A1 Rifle Marksmanship. Department of the Army, Field Manual, 1974 edition. The cover was creased at the spine and the corners had been softened by 12 years inside a footlocker. Harry looked at the book. Read the first chapter out loud, slowly. If you don't know a word, you say the word, you don't skip the word. I tell you what it means. We do this for an hour, then we do something else. Yes, Frank, Harry began reading. He read in the precise small voice of an English schoolchild who had been corrected too many times for mispronouncing things. He read the words trigger, sight picture, breath control, follow through. He read the word zeroing. He read the word ballistic. He read the word grouping. When he came to the word minute, Frank stopped him. Minute, not the kind on the clock. Minute of angle, 1/60th of a degree. At 100 yards, 1 minute of angle is about an inch. Means if you can put 3 rounds into a 1-inch circle at 100 yards, you've got a 1-minute rifle. You shoot a quarter-minute rifle, you're putting 3 rounds into a quarter-inch circle. Got it? Yes, Frank. Why does it matter? Harry thought about this. He thought longer than Frank had expected. He said, because if you can put a bullet in a small place, you can stop a person without hurting the people standing next to them. Frank looked at him. Read on, he said. The first year they did this every day, reading at 6, PT at 7, breakfast at 8. School at 9, which was Frank teaching him, and which covered arithmetic and history and English and the parts of geography that Frank cared about, which was every part of geography except the part about which crops grew where, which Frank considered a problem for farmers. Microchip came over on Tuesdays and Thursdays with grocery bags and computer printouts and a habit of pacing. He's a good kid, Microchip said the first Tuesday. He had brought pancakes. He had brought a quart of maple syrup. He had brought in the bottom of the bag a small stuffed black and white dog with one ear missing that he had bought at a thrift store on West 40th because he had thought Harry should have a thing to hold that was not a broken soldier and was not a gun. Harry accepted the dog. He thanked Microchip. He set the dog on the windowsill beside the toy soldier. He did not then or later hold the dog, but he kept it on the windowsill and dusted it, and once when Frank moved it to do work, Harry moved it back. He's a good kid, Microchip said again in the kitchenette while Harry was in the bathroom. Frankie, tell me you understand what we're doing. What are we doing, Micro? I don't know, that's what I'm asking. Frank ate a pancake, he chewed it, he swallowed it, he said, we're keeping him alive, we're teaching him to keep himself alive, we are not making a soldier, we are making a person who cannot be put back in a cupboard. And if he wants to be a soldier. Then we'll talk about that when he wants to be a soldier. He's 6. He's 6 and he field strips a 1911. He watches me field strip a 1911. He has not touched the 1911. Frankie, what? Microchip looked at him. Microchip was a small, soft man with thinning hair and good teeth who lived alone in an apartment 3 blocks east and who, when he was nervous, ate the heels off bread loaves. He ate the heel off the bread loaf on the kitchenette counter while he looked at Frank. There's a thing in him, he said. I noticed it on the second visit. He doesn't blink when he should. He waits longer than a kid waits. When you turn your back on him, he watches the back of your neck. Frankie, he's 6 and he watches the back of your neck. I noticed. What do we do with that? Frank ate another pancake. We let it grow if it wants to grow, we don't push it. We don't try to make it disappear. The thing in him was there before I got him. It saved his life in that cupboard. I'm not going to take it out of him because it makes us uncomfortable. And if it makes him uncomfortable, then we will talk about it when it makes him uncomfortable. Microchip nodded. Microchip ate the rest of the heel. Microchip washed his hands. Microchip went into the main room and sat down on the floor with Harry and a chess set he had brought, and he taught Harry the rules of chess, and Harry beat him in 17 moves on the third game, and Microchip looked over at Frank with an expression Frank chose not to interpret. The magic surfaced on a Thursday in March. Harry was 8 months in. The apartment had acquired a second mattress and a folding cot, a small chest of drawers that Frank had bought from a Polish moving company for $40, and a row of books on the windowsill that ran from FM 23.9 through 3 more field manuals, a children's edition of Treasure Island, and a battered paperback of The Old Man and the Sea that Harry had read twice and then put back on the shelf and not commented on. They were on the roof of the building. The roof was tar paper and pigeon droppings and the rusted housings of 2 air conditioners that no longer worked. Frank had set up a target, a paper silhouette pinned to a sheet of plywood propped against the parapet, and a .22 single-shot rifle bolt action with a peep sight. They had practiced for 6 weeks with the rifle unloaded. Today was the first day with a single round in the chamber. Stance, Frank said. Harry took the stance. Left foot forward, right foot back, weight even, rifle to the shoulder, cheek down on the stock, eye to the peep, sight picture. Front post in the center of the rear ring, center of the post on the center of the target. Breath. Harry exhaled half a breath the way he had been told. Trigger. Harry pressed the trigger straight back, the pad of his finger on the curve of the metal, the rest of his hand still on the grip. The .22 went crack. The plywood made a small dimpling sound. Frank looked through his spotting scope. The round had gone into the silhouette, an inch and a half left of center mass at 6 o'clock. Good, Frank said. Again, Harry worked the bolt. Frank handed him a single round. Harry chambered it, closed the bolt, returned to position, stance, sight picture, breath. Trigger crack. The round went 2 inches left of the first. You're pulling left. Why? I'm anticipating, Frank. Anticipating what? The shot. I'm pulling away from it because I know it's coming. Stop knowing it's coming. The trigger surprises you. The shot surprises you. Reset. Harry reset, stance, sight picture, breath, trigger, crack, a round through the center of the target, dead center. Harry lowered the rifle. He looked at Frank. Better, Frank said. Again. They worked through the box, 50 rounds. By the 30th, Harry was grouping 3 at a time inside a fist-sized circle at 25 yards with iron sights. By the 40th, he was grouping inside a playing card. By the 50th, Frank wanted to test something. Stand up off the bench, standing position, no support. Harry stood. He took the stance. The .22 wobbled in his small arms. He chambered, he aimed, he fired. The paper silhouette burst into flame, not the plywood, not the parapet, just the paper. The whole sheet from corner to corner in one lump of yellow fire, like a sheet of newspaper that had been doused in something flammable and lit. The flames went up 2 feet. The paper curled. Black smoke smelled like a chemistry lab. In about 4 seconds the paper was gone and there was a clean spot on the plywood and a smear of soot on the parapet behind it. Harry stood there with the rifle in his hands. He looked at the burnt silhouette. He looked at Frank. He looked at the rifle. Frank did not move. He stood with his hands at his sides. He watched the boy. Frank, Harry said. His voice was very small. I didn't mean to. I know. I don't know how I did it. I know. Are you angry? Frank looked at him for a long moment. Put the rifle on the bench. Harry put the rifle on the bench. Come here. Harry came over. He stood 3 feet in front of Frank, his hands at his sides, his eyes on Frank's chest, the way a child stands in front of a man who has, at some point in the past, hit the child for less. Frank had not hit him. Frank had not ever hit him. The stance was older than Frank. Look at me, Harry. Harry looked up. I'm not angry. Yes, Frank. I am going to ask you a question. You're going to tell me the truth. You hear me? Yes, Frank. Has anything like that ever happened before? Harry thought. His face did the small, honest work of remembering. Yes, tell me. The teacher's wig, sir, at my old school. She was mean to a girl. The wig went on the cloakroom hook. The wig burned, just the wig, sir, nothing else. Anything else? The glass at Uncle Vernon's. He drank too much one night. I was in the cupboard. The glass broke in his hand. I didn't see it. I heard him shout. I knew it had been me. Anything else? I climbed onto the roof of the school once. I was hiding. I don't remember climbing. Anything else? Harry thought. He thought longer this time. He said, "Finally, sometimes when I'm scared, things move. The blanket in the cupboard moves over me when I'm cold. The bolt on the cupboard door once when Uncle Vernon was very angry, the bolt was on the inside instead of the outside. I think I did it, I don't know how, I put it back before he came." Frank stood looking at the boy for 30 seconds. Then he turned, picked up the .22, ejected the spent casing, set the rifle on the bench. He walked to the parapet and looked out across Hell's Kitchen at a row of water towers and a far-off slice of the Hudson. The wind came up from the river smelling of diesel and salt. He came back. "All right," he said. "All right, Frank. All right, so you've got this. Some people have it. Most people don't. I don't. Microchip doesn't. You do. We're going to learn what it is. We're going to learn how to use it. We're going to learn how to not use it when we don't want to use it. We're going to treat it like every other tool in the kit. You hear me? Yes, Frank. It's not a curse. It's not a sin. It's not something to be ashamed of. It's a thing that you can do that other people can't. Like being left-handed, like having good eyes, like remembering numbers. Anybody tells you it's anything else, you do not listen to them. You hear me? Yes, Frank. Magic is a tool. Tools don't have a god, they have a user. The user is the only thing that matters, you understand? Yes, Frank, now pick up the casing. Police your brass, we're going inside. Harry picked up the casing. They went inside. That night Frank sat at the kitchenette counter with the burner phone and microchip on the other end. "I need you to find me some things." "What kind of things?" "People who can do what he did today. There's a word for it, I don't know the word." "I want the word, and I want the people, and I want to know what they call themselves, and I want to know who polices them." Microchip was silent for 2 seconds. "Frank, that's a category I don't have in any of my databases." "Find a database." "I'll try, quietly." "Frankie, I always try quietly. It is the principal quality of my trying." He hung up. Microchip called back 6 weeks later. "You're going to think I'm joking. I'm not joking. It's called magic. People who do it call themselves wizards and witches. There's an entire civilization living underneath ours. It's been there since at least the 11th century in England. They have a parliament, they have a police force, they have banks, they have schools, they have a treaty with the United Nations that says they don't exist." "You're sure?" "I am sure. I am sure because I have, in the last 6 weeks, broken into 17 government databases I should not have been able to find. And I have read 3 letters between the British Foreign Office and a department called Magical Cooperation that uses an address in central London where there is no building. There's a building there, Frankie. There's a building there that doesn't show on the city plans and doesn't show on the satellite imagery, and it has windows lit at night. I drove past it. I drove past it 3 times, I can see it now, I couldn't see it the first time. What changed? I knew to look." Frank thought about that. He looked across the room at the boy reading a children's history of the American Civil War on the mattress with the army blanket folded across his lap. "He's one of them. He's one of them. His parents. I'll get you what I can, I've already started. There's a school in Scotland, they go when they turn 11. Letters come on the 11th birthday, he has a place, they keep the list at the school. I haven't seen the list, I'm working on it. Work on it, find me the people who polices them. Find me their kill list." "Their what?" "Find me the bad ones, Micro. I want a list of names, the people who do the things you and I would shoot people for doing. The ones their own police can't or won't touch. I want names, I want faces, I want addresses, I want patterns, give me a year." "Frankie, give me a year, Micro." Microchip gave him a year. The list when it arrived was 16 names and a footnote that said "War Dead 1981 incomplete." The footnote was the part Frank cared about. Belfast in autumn smelled of peat smoke and cold seawater. Harry was 7.5. They flew in on Aer Lingus from JFK, and rented a Ford Granada at the airport, and drove west on the A2 with the boy in the passenger seat reading aloud from a paperback Frank had handed him, which was a copy of On Killing by Dave Grossman that Frank had marked with 3 colored sticky tabs, and intended to discuss with the boy over the next 3 weeks. The man they had come to meet was named Patrick Quinn, and lived in a stone cottage on a low hill above a rocky beach with a view of the Mournes. He had been, in the 70s, a quartermaster for the Provisional Irish Republican Army. He had spent 11 years in HMP Maze. He had been out for 6. He had not in those 6 years picked up a weapon. He had, however, kept his hands. Frank had known him in 1981 in circumstances neither of them mentioned. Frank had spoken to him on the phone twice in the intervening years. Frank had written him a letter 8 months earlier. Quinn had written back. The letter had said in its entirety, "Bring the boy, show him the sea first." Quinn met them at the door. He was a small man, 60, with hands the size of garden spades and a face that had been broken several times in places that had reset wrong. He shook Frank's hand. He looked down at Harry. He said in a Belfast accent so dense it sounded like another language, "Hello there, son, have you ever seen the sea?" "From an airplane, sir." Up close, no sir, come on then. They walked down the path to the rocky beach. The tide was out, the wind was steady from the southeast. Quinn picked up a flat stone and skipped it across the water. The stone bounced 4 times and sank. Harry watched. Quinn picked up another stone and handed it to him. Harry tried. The stone bounced once and sank. Hold it flatter, Quinn said. Aim low, throw it parallel to the water. It's not how hard, it's the angle. Harry tried again. The stone bounced 3 times. That's it, Quinn said. That's the way. They stood on the beach for half an hour. Quinn said almost nothing. Harry threw stones until his arm hurt, then they walked back up the path. At the cottage, Quinn made tea. He brought out 3 mugs and a plate of plain biscuits. He sat at the kitchen table across from Frank with Harry on a small stool by the stove. Right, he said, you'll be wanting the knife work. I'll be wanting the knife work. How long do I have him? 3 weeks. He goes home with all his fingers and toes, Patrick. He goes home with all his fingers and toes, Frank, but he'll be sore. He'll be sore. Quinn looked over at Harry. Son, come here a moment. Harry came over. He stood at Quinn's elbow with his small hands at his sides and his face as composed as a person waiting in a queue. Hold out your hands. Harry held out his hands. Quinn took them in his 2 big hands and turned them over and looked at them. He looked at the palms and the backs and the spaces between the fingers and the knuckles and the wrists. He held them gently. He did not press. He did not pinch. Have you ever hurt a man, son? No, sir. Have you ever wanted to? Harry thought. He said once. Tell us. Harry looked at Frank. Frank nodded once. My Uncle Vernon, sir, when he locked me in the cupboard the time I burned a teacher's wig. I was inside and he was outside, and I could hear him talking to my aunt about how I would not get any food until I learned, and I was angry, sir. I was very angry. I wanted to push the door open and find him and bite him. I think I would have bit him if I had been outside. I would have bit his ear off. Why his ear? Because it would have hurt the most, sir. Quinn nodded slowly. He set Harry's hands down gently. He patted them once, a brief unfussy contact, the way a man pats the shoulder of a horse he respects. Right, he said. Now we begin. The 3 weeks at Quinn's cottage taught Harry the following things: how to hold a fixed blade knife in 3 grips and the use of each. How to stand so that a blade in your hand looks like an empty hand to a man 6 feet away. How to read the line of a man's shoulder to know which direction he intends to move. How to step inside the reach of a longer weapon. How to disable a man with the flat of the blade rather than the edge. How to disengage and run when running was the correct option, which Quinn said was most of the time and which Frank, listening, did not contradict. On the last evening, Quinn sat with them at the kitchen table over a stew he had made and said to Frank, He's got a thing in him, this one. I know it. It's not the thing you think it is. What is it then? Quinn looked at the boy. The boy was eating stew. The boy was holding a spoon in the correct grip for a spoon, which was a different grip from any of the 3 knife grips, and the distinction was a thing that mattered to Quinn. He's a kind one, Quinn said. Underneath, he'll do what you teach him to do and he'll do it well. But underneath, when he's old, when this is all done, he'll be a kind one. Don't lose that, Frank. The kind ones are the only ones who come back. Frank did not answer. The man named Salinger lived in a brownstone in Brooklyn off Atlantic Avenue. He had, over the course of 4 years, recruited 8 runaway children out of the Port Authority bus terminal and moved them through a chain of houses and then out of the country to clients in places whose names Frank did not say out loud in front of Harry. The youngest had been 9. 2 of the 8 had come back. One had been found by police in a hostel in Bangkok and had been returned to her mother in Ohio. The other had walked out of a house in Antwerp in a torn dress and had given a statement to a Belgian magistrate before she became unable to give statements to anyone. The other 6 had not come back. Salinger had not been charged. Salinger had 3 lawyers and an uncle who sat on a federal bench in the Eastern District. Salinger gave to charity. Salinger had a wife who did not ask questions. Frank had been watching Salinger for 10 months. Microchip had pulled the financial records, the travel records, the cell records, and an audit trail of payments to a man in Antwerp who was not on paper, a man who needed payments from a Brooklyn realtor. Frank had been planning to do the thing alone. Harry was 8 years and 3 months old. He had been with Frank for 2¼ years. He could group 10 rounds inside a 3-inch circle at 25 yards standing with the .22. He could hold a knife 3 ways. He had not, since the silhouette on the roof, burned anything else. The thing in him, the thing Microchip had named and Quinn had named, stayed quiet as if it were waiting for instruction. The night before Frank moved on Salinger, Harry came out of the bathroom in his pajamas and stood by the card table where Frank was loading magazines. Frank. Yeah, where are you going tomorrow? Frank looked at him. He set down the magazine. He sat back in the folding chair. Sit down. Harry sat on the mattress. There's a man in Brooklyn who hurts children. He moves them out of the country. Some of them come back hurt. Some of them don't come back. Tomorrow I am going to take him out of the world. Harry listened. I am telling you this because in this house you will not be lied to, you hear me? Yes, Frank, you don't have to come, you don't have to know any more about it than I have told you. I will tell Microchip to come over in the morning, he will make you pancakes, you will read your book. Harry looked at him. I want to come, Frank. You're 8. You said in this house I would not be lied to. You said the man hurts children. I want to see what you do when a man hurts children so that I know. Frank looked at him for a long time. You will not touch a weapon, you will not enter the building. You will stand on the corner across the street with Microchip. You will watch from outside, you will see what you can see from there. You will go home with Microchip and we will talk about it after. If you want out at any point, you tell Microchip the word is Olive, and Microchip will take you back to the apartment and you will not be punished and nothing will be said about it. Do you understand? Yes, Frank, Olive. Olive. Harry lay down on the mattress. He pulled the army blanket up to his chin. The toy soldier was in his left hand. The little black and white dog was on the windowsill. Frank loaded magazines until 2 a.m. The next night at 11:23 p.m., Frank walked into the back kitchen of a brownstone in Brooklyn through a basement door whose lock he had defeated 3 nights earlier. He went up 2 flights of stairs in soft-soled shoes. He found Salinger in a study on the 3rd floor, sitting in a wing-back chair with a glass of port and a copy of the Wall Street Journal. Salinger looked up. Salinger saw the gun. Salinger said very fast, "Whatever you've been paid, I will double it. Whatever you've been paid, I will triple it. I have a safe in the wall behind you. I have $19,000 in the safe and I have account numbers for accounts in Geneva that I will give you in writing." Frank waited until he had stopped talking. Frank said, 8 children, 6 who didn't come back. He shot Salinger twice in the chest with a suppressed 1911 and once in the head with the same, and he was out of the building 4 minutes after he had entered it, and the dog on the 2nd floor never woke up. On the corner across the street, Microchip and an 8-year-old boy in a navy peacoat that was a size too large stood in the half-shadow of a chestnut tree. Microchip had his hand on the boy's shoulder. The boy was looking up at the 3rd floor window. The 3rd floor window had a single yellow lamp on. The lamp went out at 11:27. Frank came out the front door at 11:28, walked down the brownstone steps without hurry, crossed the street and joined them under the chestnut tree. Let's go, he said. They walked 4 blocks before Frank spoke. What did you see? A lamp, Harry said. Then no lamp. What did you hear? Nothing. What do you understand? The boy considered the question. He was holding Frank's hand. He had taken it after the 2nd block and Frank had let him take it. The hand was still small. It was warmer than it had been on Privet Drive. He hurt children, Harry said. That was the rule, so you took him out of the world. That's the rule. Does it always work like that, Frank? It works like that when you've done the work. You watch them, you learn them, you make sure. You do not move on a man because you think he might have. You move on a man because you know he has, and you can prove it to yourself, and you can prove it to the person who will ask you about it later. Who asks you about it later? I do. Harry walked. He thought about this for half a block. Then he said, Does anyone else ask you? Number, should they? Frank considered this. He looked down at the boy. Maybe, someday, if you stay with me, if you keep doing this, maybe you will, maybe I will need you to. All right, Frank, all right. They got to the Manhattan Bridge and Microchip flagged a cab and they rode home in the back, the 3 of them in a row, Harry in the middle, Frank to his right, Microchip to his left. Microchip looked over Harry's head at Frank and his face did a thing that Frank did not interpret. Microchip turned and looked out the window the rest of the way. In the apartment, Harry took off the peacoat and folded it and laid it over the back of the folding chair. He went into the bathroom. He brushed his teeth. He came out in his pajamas. He climbed onto the mattress. The toy soldier was in his left hand. The little black and white dog was on the windowsill. He looked up at Frank, who was sitting at the kitchenette counter with a glass of water. Frank. Yeah, thank you. Frank set the glass down. For what? For not lying to me, Frank. Frank looked at him for a long moment. Sleep, kid. Harry slept. Frank sat at the counter. He did not drink the water. He did not move for a long time. The named emotion that crossed his face in the small hours in the lamp light off the street that came through the cracked sash was trust. It was not a thing he had felt often. He recognized it slowly, the way a man who has lived in a desert recognizes the smell of rain. He sat with it. He did not look away. The next morning they began on the 2nd name on Microchip's list. Microchip's research went by stages from impossible to merely difficult. He found a woman in Queens who had been expelled from the British school in the 1960s for reasons the records were vague on. Her name was Eileen Travers. She lived above a tobacconist on Astoria Boulevard with 3 cats and the kind of stooped, wary patience of a person who has spent 40 years pretending to be someone she was not. Microchip paid her in cash and gave her his good word. She gave him 3 books, 2 of them written in a script the alphabet of which he had to teach himself from a Berlitz pamphlet aimed at 12-year-olds. The third was in English of a sort. It was titled A Beginner's Companion to the Casting Arts. It was in places condescending. In places it was clear. In one chapter it explained, in the tone of a man explaining how to start a lawnmower, the underlying mechanism by which a person bent will into pattern and pattern into effect. Frank read the books at the kitchenette counter at night with a yellow legal pad and a pencil. He took notes the way he took notes on a weapons system. He underlined the parts that were specific. He drew arrows. He drew brackets. He distilled over 6 weeks what he thought were the 3 operating principles. Magic listens to intent. Magic is paid for inattention. Magic untrained leaks. He set the 3 principles in front of Harry over breakfast one morning. He read them aloud. He asked the boy if any of them rang true. Harry chewed his porridge and considered. He said, "The third one, Frank, tell me. When I was in the cupboard, things happened that I didn't mean. I think they happened because I was leaking, like a tap that wasn't shut tight. And now, it's quieter since you weren't angry. I think it's quieter because I know it's there. Can you do it on purpose?" "I don't know, I haven't tried." "Try." Harry set down the spoon. He put his hands on the edge of the table. He looked at the empty bowl. He looked at it for half a minute, then very slowly the bowl slid 2 inches across the table toward him. Frank watched. Again, Harry slid the bowl back. Smaller the spoon. Harry slid the spoon. The spoon went too far and clinked against the edge of the bowl. Harry flinched. Nothing burned. The spoon stayed where it was. "Better," Frank said, "every morning. 5 minutes before breakfast, you move things, small things, you don't break things, you don't burn things, you learn the throttle." "Yes, Frank." It became part of the routine the way reading had become part of the routine. The boy moved spoons, then forks, then pencils, then a tin cup. He learned to hold an object an inch above the table for a slow count of 10. He learned to slide a cup along a counter in a straight line without spilling. He learned, after 11 weeks, to light a single candle wick without disturbing the wax. By the end of his 9th year he could, in a quiet room with the door closed, hover the toy soldier with the broken arm an arm's length off the mattress and lower it back down without dropping it. He did not, after the silhouette on the roof, ever again set fire to a thing he had not meant to set fire to. Quinn, written to in a careful letter Microchip helped Frank draft, replied in 3 lines, "Glad to hear it. Tell the boy I owe him another stone skip lesson. He kept his hands, didn't he? They thought he might." Frank read the letter twice, and then put it in the drawer where he kept the photograph of the man with the round glasses and the woman with the green eyes, and the small dental retainer that he had taken on the way out of Number 4, from a bedside table belonging to a sleeping child to whom he had owed nothing and from whom he had taken nothing else, and which sat in the drawer because Frank Castle had not, after some thought, been able to say to himself why he had taken it, and was, on a night many years later, going to send it back to a man named Dudley Dursley in a small, unmarked envelope with no return address, for reasons that Dudley Dursley would, by then, perhaps understand. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. A name in a stairwell. Grozny in the winter of 1990 smelled of unburned diesel and the cold ash of a coal fire that had not been put out properly. The man who met them at the airport was named Rustem Dodov, and he had been, for the previous 6 years, a forester in the Argun Gorge. Before that he had been an officer in a unit that was not on paper an officer in a unit. He was tall, taller than Frank, and wore a sheepskin coat that had been mended at the collar with thick blue thread. He looked at Harry, who was 10 years and 2 months old and had spent the past 9 hours on 3 different airplanes, and he said in careful English, "He is a small one." "He's strong," Frank said. "They are all strong," Rustem said, "until they are not. Get in the car." The car was a Lada Niva painted the color of weak coffee. They drove south out of Grozny on roads that had been plowed once that day and would not be plowed again. The light went out of the sky at 4 p.m. The mountains rose on the right, blue and then black. Harry sat in the back with his small green canvas duffel between his knees, his face turned to the window, his eyes counting things. Rooftops, smokestacks, men standing at corners with cigarettes, the angle at which a power line bowed under the weight of new ice. The cabin Rustem took them to was a hand's breadth above the snow line in a fold of the mountain that was not on any map he had shown them in advance. There were 2 stoves. There was no electricity. The water came from a well outside the back door and was, for the first 3 minutes of any morning, ice. There was a long table along one wall, and on the table was a tarp folded into a precise square, and on the tarp Rustem laid out that first evening the curriculum. A PSL marksman rifle, 2 AKMs, a Makarov, a bolt-action Mosin that had been re-sleeved and re-trigger jobbed by a man in Kazan in 1978. 3 blocks of plastic explosive of a kind Frank had not used in 6 years. A roll of detonating cord, 2 pull-friction fuses, a coil of bell wire. A wooden box of dummy pressure plates, a folder in Cyrillic with photographs of road junctions, bridge abutments, culvert mouths. This week, Rustam said, is the rifle, next week is the AK, week after the close work. Week 4 demolition, weeks 5 and 6 the ground. He's 10, Frank said. He looks like he's 10, Rustam said. He looked at Harry. He said in a tone that did not invite contradiction, you will learn quickly, small one, or you will not learn. Either is acceptable. The mountain does not care. Harry inclined his head once. The gesture was old. Yes, sir. 6 weeks in a cabin without electricity teaches a person things that are not on the curriculum. Harry learned to break ice off the well chain with his bare hand and not lose the feeling in his fingers afterward. He learned to read the slope of a snowfield for avalanche risk. He learned to walk on a switchback trail with a 15-kilogram pack and pace his breathing to the climb without thinking about it. He learned the angle at which a bullet ricochets off frozen ground and the angle at which it does not. He learned the PSL from the sandbag and then from the prone with bipod and then from the standing with sling. He shot a one-shot group of 3 centimeters at 300 meters in his 4th week, lying in a hollow of packed snow with the rifle resting on a folded sheepskin, on a windless morning at -12 degrees, while Rustam sat on a stump 50 yards back smoking a cigarette and timing him on a wristwatch. Good, Rustam said when Harry rolled onto his back and pulled the bolt out of the action and set the rifle down in the snow. Now you will do it again in wind. Harry did it again in wind on the next afternoon and the group was 15 centimeters and he had been pulling left and Rustam slapped his left shoulder with the flat of one big hand and said, "You are anticipating again. Stop anticipating. The trigger surprises you. The shot surprises you." Frank, sitting on the same stump, did not laugh. The demolition week was the week Frank had been most uncertain about and the week after that he stopped being uncertain about. Harry took to it the way some boys take to mathematics. He understood almost at once that explosives were not a weapon but a tool of geometry. You did not blow things up. You shaped a blast. You aimed it. You used the structure of the thing you were demolishing against itself. By the end of the 4th week, Harry could prepare a directional charge to drop a hardwood post at a marked point on the ground, plus or minus 3 centimeters from the mark, using a quantity of plastic explosive that Rustam measured out by eye and Harry measured by Frank's kitchen scale. He could lay a roadside ambush charge with a pull fuse on a tripwire strung in a way that a careful man would not see, and a careless man would not survive. He could place a frame charge on a steel door of the kind found in Western European apartment blocks and remove the door without injuring a person standing 3 meters behind it. Frank watched these competencies accumulate and did not on any night of any of the 6 weeks sleep less than 5 hours. On the last day of the 6th week the men came to the cabin. They came in a Russian-made cargo van down the switchback at 2 in the morning, 4 of them. A Bratva crew out of Volgograd that had been told by a man in a bar in Mineralny Vody that there was an American hunter and a Chechen forester paying cash for furs at a high price in a cabin above the snow line. The men were not by trade fur traders. They were by trade the kind of men who went up mountains in the dark looking for cabins where Americans paid cash and were 500 kilometers from the nearest American consulate. Rustam was on the porch with a kettle and a cigarette when their headlights came up the last bend. He did not move. He let the kettle whistle. He set the cigarette down on the rail. He went inside. "They are here," he said. Frank was awake before Rustam had finished the sentence. Harry was awake at the second syllable. They had run this drill 9 times in 3 weeks. Harry rolled out of the bunk in the long johns and wool sweater he had slept in, took the Makarov from under the pillow, checked the chamber, stepped into his boots. Frank had the Mosin in his hand. Rustam went out the back door low behind the woodpile. The van stopped 20 meters from the porch. The headlights stayed on. 3 men got out. 1 stayed at the wheel. Frank watched through a gap in the shutter. He counted weapons. AK-74U short carbines on slings. 1 man with a pistol drawn. The driver behind the windshield was a silhouette, 2 hands on the wheel, head up, looking at the cabin. "The driver is mine," Frank murmured. Rustam takes the right, the man with the carbine and the broken nose. The other 2 come up the steps. You wait until they are inside the doorway. "The one in front is yours, Harry. Center mass, 1 shot. Drop him in the doorway so the second one trips. The second one I take with the Mosin on the floor." "Yes, Frank." "Breathe," Harry breathed. The two men came up the steps. The boots were loud on the wooden planks. They stopped. The first one called out in Russian the words that translate as "Excuse me, my friends, we are lost. We are looking for the cabin of Magomedov. Do you know him?" Rustam did not answer. The first man took another step. The first man tried the door. The door was unlatched. The door swung open under the press of his hand. The man stood in the doorway with the carbine across his chest. He looked into the dim cabin lit by the stove. He saw, perhaps, the corner of a bunk and a kettle on a wood stove and the long shape of a coat hanging on a peg. He did not see the small boy standing in the shadow of the chimney breast, 8 feet inside the door, holding a Makarov in 2 hands at the cup and saucer grip Quinn had taught him, his left foot forward, his cheek down, his eye on the man's chest above the lowest button of the open coat. Harry fired once. The Makarov made the round little crack that Makarovs make when fired indoors. The man in the doorway folded. The man behind him, who had been a step back, registered the sound and brought his carbine up and was killed by Frank with 1 round from the Mawson into the upper chest at 14 feet. The man tried to fire on his way down and put 3 rounds into the cabin floor between Harry's boots, all of which Harry observed without moving. Outside, 2 more shots. The carbine man at the right of the van and the driver. Rustam came around the corner of the cabin walking, the AKM low across his body, the muzzle still warm. Frank stepped over the man in the doorway, checked the throat for pulse, found none. He looked at the second man, no pulse. He turned to look at Harry. Harry had not moved. The Makarov was still in 2 hands at the cup and saucer grip. His eyes were on the doorway. He had not lowered the weapon. "Harry." "Yes, Frank." "Lower the weapon, eject the magazine, clear the chamber." Harry did all 3 things in the order given exactly. The Makarov went on the table. The ejected round rolled half a turn on the wood and stopped. "Look at me, son." Harry looked at him. "Are you hurt?" "No, Frank." "Did you do everything right?" Harry considered. He went through the sequence in his head the way he had been taught. Stance, sight picture, breath, trigger, follow through. "Yes, Frank, good." Frank looked at the man on the floor. He had a fan-shaped buckle on his belt of the kind a man might buy in a market and bring home to wear with his cheap brown suit. Frank looked at the buckle for a moment. He did not point it out to the boy. "Wipe down the pistol," he said. "We police the brass, we bag the rounds, Rustam takes the bodies, we are gone in 90 minutes. "Yes, Frank." Harry wiped down the pistol with a square of clean cot. He worked methodically. He did not look at the man on the floor more than twice, and the second time he looked at him, he looked at the buckle, and his face did the small, honest work of recognizing a thing, and then he went back to wiping the pistol. They were gone in 83 minutes. The cabin in the Argonne Gorge had a chimney pot shaped like a thistle. Frank watched it disappear in the rearview as the Neva went down the switchback. Rustam drove. Frank rode shotgun. Harry was in the back with the green canvas duffel between his knees. 2 kilometers down the road, Frank looked over his shoulder. "Harry." "Yes, Frank, you all right?" Harry thought about this. He thought about it in the slow, honest way he thought about things. He said, "I am cold, Frank." "You did good." "Yes, Frank, you hear me, you did good." "Yes, Frank. You will think about it later. You will think about it tonight when we are on the plane. You will think about it tomorrow. You will think about it in 2 weeks when you are at home in the apartment with microchip and there is no work to do. The thinking is the price. You pay the price. You do not skip the price. You hear me?" "Yes, Frank. And when you have paid the price, you put it down. You do not carry it. You do not let it ride on your back into the next thing. That is how men become broken. They carry. You will not carry. You will pay and you will put it down." "Yes, Frank. Good." Rustam drove. The light came up over the eastern ridge. Harry slept against the door with the canvas duffel for a pillow, and Frank looked at him in the rearview and thought about a man's buckle and a small boy in the inside wall of a cupboard, and he thought about the price and he thought about putting it down, and he made, somewhere between 2 passes of the windshield wipers, a small and private vow. He kept it. The owl arrived 4 months later through the bathroom window. Harry had turned 11 on the 31st of July. The apartment on 10th Avenue had been replaced 2 summers earlier by a slightly larger apartment on West 47th Street, on the 3rd floor of a building microchip had vetted 3 different ways. The window in the bathroom looked out over an air shaft, and was that morning open 6 inches at the bottom because Harry had gone in to brush his teeth and the steam was making the small mirror fog. The owl came in through the gap. It was the size of a cat. Its feathers were the color of bone. It landed on the towel rail above the sink and folded its wings with a small disgusted flick, as if to make clear that the air shaft of a Manhattan walk-up was beneath the dignity of any owl, no matter how junior. It had an envelope in its beak. Harry looked at the owl looked at Harry. Harry very slowly put down his toothbrush. He extended his hand, palm up, the way Quinn had taught him to extend a hand to a strange dog. The owl tilted its head. It dropped the envelope on his palm. It cleared its throat in the small, dry way owls do when they consider themselves to have rendered a service. Harry walked out of the bathroom with the envelope on his palm and the toothbrush in his other hand and a faint smear of mint on his lower lip. Frank was at the kitchen counter loading a magazine. Yeah. There is an owl in the bathroom. Frank looked up. There is an owl in the bathroom, Harry said, and the owl has given me a letter. The letter was a heavy cream paper with a wax seal in the shape of an arrangement of 4 animals around a letter H. The address on the front, in green ink in a hand that was almost too elegant to read, said, Mr. H. J. Castle, the 3rd floor bathroom, West 47th Street, Manhattan, New York City, USA. Frank looked at the address. Frank looked at the boy. Frank looked at the bathroom door behind which the owl was now making a small fluffing noise. All right, he said. Open it. Harry opened it. The letter, which Harry read aloud, invited Mr. H. J. Castle to attend Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry on the 1st of September. It listed required textbooks. It listed required uniforms. It noted that students were permitted to bring an owl, a cat, or a toad. It was signed by a deputy headmistress called Minerva McGonagall. Frank let Harry read it through twice. Right, he said, pack a bag, we are going to Diagon Alley, we are going to buy whatever they want us to buy, we are going to look at the building, we are going to look at the school, we are going to come home and decide together, you hear me? Yes, Frank, and kid, yes. This was always coming. Microchip and I have been ready for this since you were 9, we have a plan, you have a place, we will go through the plan on the flight. There is nothing about this that is not on a list somewhere in this apartment, you understand? Yes, Frank, good, get the owl out of the bathroom. Diagon Alley was a narrow cobbled street folded behind a London pub, accessible by tapping a brick wall in a particular sequence. Frank had memorized the sequence from a diagram Microchip had produced 6 weeks earlier. He tapped the wall opened. Harry, beside him, watched the bricks fold themselves back with an expression that did not betray surprise. Harry had stopped being surprised by things several years earlier. He had not stopped noticing. They went to Gringotts first. Frank had a key Microchip had acquired the previous spring from a contact who had refused on the phone to be paid in anything but bearer bonds. The vault contained a quantity of gold that Frank did not, when he saw it, audibly react to. He filled a small leather pouch. He made a note in his book of the conversion rate which Microchip had warned him would be unfavorable. He thanked the goblin who had ridden them down on the cart. The goblin looked at him with a flat black eye and did not return the courtesy and did not, when Frank held the door for him on the way out, fail to register that the man had held the door. They bought robes at Madame Malkin's. Harry stood on a stool and was measured by a small woman with pins in her mouth who did not, although she tried, get him to make small talk. They bought books at Flourish and Blots. Frank read the first 2 chapters of the Defense Against the Dark Arts textbook standing in the aisle and underlined 3 passages with a pencil in a way that the proprietor pretended not to notice. They bought a cauldron, a brass scale, a glass file set, a telescope. Harry carried the basket and read titles off the shelves as they passed. A Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration, Magical Theory, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. He filed each title. Ollivander's wand shop was a narrow shop with dust in the corners and a thin tall man behind the counter whose eyes were the color of frozen lake water. Frank did not like him on entering. Frank did not stop not liking him on leaving. Mr. Ollivander wished to know the lineage of the young man's parents, and Frank, leaning on a counter with his arms folded, said in a tone that did not invite further inquiry, "Show him the wands." Mr. Ollivander showed the wands. The first 3 did nothing. The 4th caused a vase in the corner to overturn. The 5th scorched the counter. The 6th, 11 inches holly and phoenix feather fit Harry's hand. The shop did not, when the wand chose him, fill with the small wind that other shops had filled with for other boys. The wand simply warmed in his hand, and Harry held it the way he had been taught to hold a tool, and he set it down on the counter when Mr. Ollivander asked him to. Curious, Mr. Ollivander said, very curious. What is curious? Frank said. Mr. Ollivander told them. Mr. Ollivander told them about the brother wand and the man who had wielded the brother wand and the night a child had survived a curse that should not have been survivable. Mr. Ollivander told the story carefully. Frank listened with the patience of a man receiving operational intelligence from a source he had not yet decided to trust. When Mr. Ollivander had finished, Frank said, "The brother wand, the man who owned it, where is he?" "Dead, sir, or as good as. There is no one alive who can produce a body and no one alive who can produce a death. He is at large in some form. The polite word, sir, is dispersed." "Polite words don't pay rent," Frank said. "What is the impolite word?" Mr. Ollivander considered this. Mr. Ollivander looked from Frank to the small boy with the holly wand on the counter. Mr. Ollivander said with what was, for him, frankness. Hunting. Frank nodded once. He paid for the wand. They left outside on the cobbled street in the late summer sun coming down through the chimneys. Frank crouched in front of the boy and looked him in the eye. You heard the man. Yes, Frank, you understand what he said. He said the man who killed my mother and my father is still in the world. He said he is hunting. He said the wand in my hand is the brother of the wand he used. You understand what that means? It means I am going to find him, Frank. It means we are going to find him. Yes, Frank, and it means we are going to do the work first. We are not going to make a list and run. We are going to make a list and watch. We are going to make a list and verify. We are going to make sure. We are not going to move on a man until we have made sure. You hear me? Yes, Frank, good, get up. We are going to the train station. We are going to look at the train. The 1st of September at platform 9 3/4 was crowded with families. Frank, in a long dark coat that was not on close inspection, the long dark coat of a man going to a wedding, stood with Harry on the platform and watched the families. He registered the parents who hugged for too long. He registered the older brothers who tried to look bored and the younger sisters who did not try to look anything. He registered the 2 men in maroon robes at the far end of the platform pretending to read a newspaper. He bent down to the boy. You have your kit. Yes, Frank, you have your list. Yes, Frank, tell me the list. Harry recited the list. He recited it from memory in the order Microchip and Frank had drilled while the steam from the engine drifted along the platform. Get sorted into whichever house puts you closest to the man called Quirrell, who Microchip's research had identified as the new defense teacher and a man whose travel records included a year on the continent that had gone unaccounted for. Make a friend who is good with books. Make a friend who knows the local politics. Be polite to the staff. Do not show what you know, read everything, write home weekly, wait for the moment, do not move before the moment, when the moment comes move clean. Good, Frank said, go. Harry looked at him for a moment. He did not hug him, he did not offer to, he inclined his head the way he had inclined it to Rustem in a cabin in Chechnya. Frank inclined his back. Frank, yeah, I will write, you will, I will not move before the moment, you will not. Harry took the trolley with the trunk and the owl in the wire cage and the small leather pouch in his pocket and he walked toward the train. He did not look back. Frank watched him bored. He watched the door close. He watched the train pull out at 11 o'clock exactly, and he stood on the platform until the last car was around the bend, and the steam had drifted up against the iron struts of the station roof and the platform had emptied of the parents. He went home to the apartment on West 47th Street, and he sat at the kitchen counter, and he did not turn on the lamp, and he watched the gold of the early afternoon slide across the kitchen floor. The sorting hat, when set on Harry's head 4 hours later, was a piece of dark brown felt that smelled of dust and old velvet. The voice inside it was a small dry voice that spoke in Harry's left ear. Well, said the voice. Well, well, well. You are not a usual case. There is courage in you, but the courage has been planed flat into something quieter. There is loyalty in you, but the loyalty is to a single man and not to a house. There is intelligence in you, plenty of it, but it has been trained on tools the founder of Ravenclaw did not have words for. And there is a willingness in you to do what is necessary that I have not seen in this hat since the year 1945. So tell me, young Mr. Castle, where shall I put you? Harry, very quietly in the bowl of his own head, answered, wherever puts me closest to the new defense teacher, sir. The voice was silent for 2 seconds. The voice said, I see. That is honest, at least. The defense teacher's house this year is Slytherin. You will not be made welcome there. You will be made tolerated. You will be watched. You will be tested. Are you prepared for that? Yes, sir. Very well, said the voice, and aloud to the hall, Slytherin. The Slytherin table did not as a body cheer. It looked, it assessed. It took the measure of the small, dark-haired boy with the round glasses who walked to the end of the bench and sat down with a composure that suggested he had been doing it all his life. A blond boy in the middle of the table had been about to extend a hand. The boy did not extend the hand. The boy watched. At the staff table, a man with a turban set his goblet down with a click. A man in black with a hooked nose did not change expression. A small woman in a pointed hat looked at the new Slytherin with an expression that was, briefly, the expression of a teacher who has just had a fixed point on a chart turn out to be in the wrong place. A tall man with a long silver beard inclined his head slowly once, and the gesture might have been a greeting and might have been an acknowledgement of something rather more complicated. Harry ate. Harry was polite. Harry, when addressed by the blond boy beside him, gave his name as Harry Castle, gave his hometown as New York, gave his interests as reading and chess, and gave nothing else. The blond boy who had introduced himself as Draco of the House of Malfoy observed after some minutes that Castle did not seem like a wizarding name. Harry said with a small polite smile that it was his stepfather's name and that he had used it as long as he could remember. The blond boy let it pass. The blond boy was already filing. Across the hall at the Gryffindor table, a bushy-haired girl was lecturing a red-haired boy about the proper pronunciation of a Latin incantation. The red-haired boy was eating with one cheek visibly full. Both at one point glanced across at the Slytherin table. The girl said in a tone of factual observation, "He sits like a soldier." The boy said around the chicken leg, "He what?" The girl did not repeat herself. At the staff table, the man with the turban said in a voice that did not quite achieve the lightness he had aimed for, "An interesting sorting." The man with the hooked nose, without looking at him, said, "Yes, nothing more." The first 4 months at Hogwarts were the easiest 4 months Harry had had in 5 years. There was no one shooting at him, the food was hot, plentiful, and free. The lessons were, with the exception of 2, taught by people who clearly understood their subjects and clearly wanted their students to understand theirs. The 2 exceptions were the ghost who taught history of magic and the man in the turban who taught defense against the dark arts. The ghost was bad at his job for reasons of long death. The man in the turban was bad at his job for reasons Harry, after the first week of classes, was reasonably sure he understood. He wrote in his weekly letter to Frank in a code Microchip had designed and the 3 of them had memorized. The subject smells of garlic at all hours and stutters most heavily when the subject of dark creatures is raised. The subject's turban does not come off. The subject does not sit with his back to a door. The subject's right hand, observed in dining hall, shakes when picking up a cup if the cup is in a certain orientation. The subject takes private walks in the corridor on the 3rd floor that is forbidden to students. The subject has visited a certain corridor 4 times in 2 weeks, each time after curfew. Recommendation: surveillance only, no move until the holiday. Frank, in reply in the same code, confirmed, hold, holiday window is December 27 to 30. Cloak comes by post December 24. Verify alone, move clean, do not engage if more than 1 body in the corridor. 2 in the chest. If turban, 2 through the turban from behind. Harry filed the letter. He made the friends he had been told to make. The bushy-haired girl turned out to be named Hermione Granger and turned out, on closer acquaintance, to be a person who would not lie to him and could not be lied to without noticing, which was a useful combination. The red-haired boy turned out to be named Ronald Weasley and turned out to be, in the lay sense, decent, in a way that did not survive scrutiny but did survive a willingness to overlook things, which was also useful. Harry made the friendships across house lines, which was unusual and which the Slytherin table noticed, and which the blond boy reported by the second letter to his father. Harry, in the dorm at night, lay on his back in a 4-poster bed with the curtains drawn and the small leather pouch under his pillow and the holly wand on the table beside him, and he listened to the breathing of the other 4 boys in the room, and he ran through the corridor diagrams Microchip had sent. He was, by the end of October, able to walk the entire 3rd floor of the castle in his head with his eyes closed. The troll came on Halloween. The professor in the turban came into the feast at the appropriate moment, with the appropriate performance, and Harry watched the performance from his place at the Slytherin table with the small, steady attention of a man watching a magic trick he has already worked out. The girl Hermione he had registered earlier in the day had not come to dinner. She had been crying in a toilet on the 1st floor since the lunch break, having had a remark from the red-haired boy land badly. The professor in the turban had been near the trophy room on the 1st floor at 6 p.m. The troll, by simple inference, was on the 1st floor. Harry rose from the Slytherin table at the precise moment the prefect rose to begin escorting the first-years to their dormitory. He fell in at the rear of the column. He stayed at the rear until the column reached the staircase to the dungeons, at which point he stepped sideways into a tapestried alcove and was not, by anyone except possibly the staff table and possibly not even them, missed. From the alcove he took, out of the inside pocket of his school robe, a coil of fine braided wire with 2 small wooden handles at the ends, which Quinn had made him in Belfast on the 2nd week of the 2nd visit and which Harry had carried in one pocket or another every day since. The girls' toilet on the 1st floor smelled of soap and damp stone. He found Hermione behind a stall door. He told her in a quiet voice that there was a troll in the castle and that he was going to deal with it and that she was to lock the stall door behind him and not come out until he came back. The girl looked at him. She did not ask any of the questions another girl would have asked. She said, "All right, Harry." She locked the stall. The troll came around the corner at the end of the corridor a minute later. It was 12 feet tall, it smelled of rotted meat and pond water, it had a club the size of a fence post, it saw the small boy in the corridor. Harry in his head ran the sequence. He was not going to shoot a troll, he had no gun. The troll's weight was 3/4 of a ton, of which all but perhaps 50 kilograms was muscle and bone. The troll's brain was about the size of a tangerine, situated low and forward in the skull, behind a thick plate of bone. The neck of the troll, however, the neck was a thing of meat and tendon and a single large windpipe that ran in a particular place under the skin. Harry had read 3 chapters on troll anatomy in a library book he had requested in his second week. He let the troll come, he stepped into the doorway of the toilet, he drew the wire, he waited. The troll bent its head into the doorway. The troll's neck, 8 inches above the lintel, hung at the height of a small boy's reach. Harry came up off the floor in one motion, his right boot landing on the porcelain rim of the sink, his left boot pushing off the doorjamb, the wire going over the troll's neck from behind in the motion Quinn had drilled for 90 days, the handles crossing in his fists, the loop closing. He hung. The troll bellowed. The troll thrashed. The troll's club connected with the wall and brought down a portion of the wall. The wire was a 30-pound test braided steel that had been designed to take down small game in the Donegal Hills. The wire did not break. The troll's windpipe collapsed at 3 seconds. The carotid pinched at 5. The thrashing slowed at 13. The troll went down at 22 very heavily on the floor of the corridor, and Harry rode it down with the handles still crossed and did not let go until Quinn's count of 40. Hermione behind the stall door did not come out for 2 minutes, and when she did not then or later ask why a first-year Slytherin had killed a troll with a wire. The teachers arrived. The professor in the turban came last. The professor in the turban, looking down at the dead troll, made a small noise in his throat that was, Harry registered, the noise a man makes when he has lost a piece on a chessboard he had not realized was a chessboard. The deputy headmistress looked from the troll to the boy to the wire to the cracked sink, and she said with a quiet precision that was, Harry was coming to learn, characteristic of her. Mr. Castle, my office, now. Harry inclined his head once. Yes, ma'am. The deputy headmistress in her office did not give him a detention, she gave him a cup of tea. She asked him 3 questions and accepted his 3 answers, which were honest in their dimensions and dishonest in their geometry. She did not ask the question she most wanted to ask, which was where exactly did you come by a steel garrote, and Harry did not, when she did not ask it, supply the answer. They sat in her office for half an hour. When he left, she looked at him for a long moment from behind her desk and she said, Be careful, Mr. Castle. He inclined his head, he left. In the corridor outside the office, hidden in an alcove behind a tapestry of a knight on a green horse, the man with the long silver beard was watching the door close. He stroked his beard. He did not, on this occasion, say anything. The cloak came by post on the 24th of December. The note pinned to the cloak said, This belonged to your father, use it well. The note was unsigned. Harry recognized the handwriting from the address on the Hogwarts letter and he filed the recognition. He showed the cloak to no one, he folded it. He put it in the bottom of his trunk under 3 layers of school robes. On the night of the 28th of December at 23:15, Harry left his dorm. He left it under the cloak. He walked the 3rd floor in his soft-soled boots in the way Microchip's diagrams had drilled. He took up a position in the alcove behind the suit of armor at the head of the stairs that led to the corridor that was forbidden to students. He waited. The professor in the turban came at 23:40. He was alone. He walked to the door at the end of the corridor, he laid a hand on the door, he muttered a word, he paused, he turned, he looked back along the corridor. He said, in a voice that was, Harry noted clinically, not the voice of the professor who taught defense against the dark arts but a different voice, higher, thinner, more distant, Show yourself! Harry, under the cloak, did not show himself. The voice waited. The voice spoke again in the same not his own register. The voice said, I can smell you, child. You smell of metal and cold water in a country I have not been to. Harry waited. The professor in the turban turned back to the door. The professor in the turban began to remove the turban. He did this slowly, the way a man does when he is alone in a private moment. The turban came off. The face on the back of the professor's head opened its red eyes and breathed in the cold corridor air the way a swimmer breathes coming up from a long dive. Harry was on him in 3 steps. The cloak came off in the same motion. The wire went over the head of the professor and the back face from the front, and the loop closed under the chin. The professor's hands came up. The professor's hands met the wire. The professor screamed. The back face screamed in a different register, higher, distant. The wire did not break. Harry rode the man down to one knee. The wire bit. The throat closed. The professor went over forward and Harry rode him over, and the professor's hands fell away from the wire because his hands were no longer obeying him, and Harry held the wire closed for Quinn's count of 40, and then he held it closed for another count of 40, and then he let go. The body on the floor went still. Above the body in the cold corridor air, a thing rose. It was a thin shape, almost transparent, the color of smoke off a wet fire. It had a face. The face screamed in a register that Harry felt in his teeth and not his ears. The thing turned. The thing fled down the corridor through the closed window at the end in the manner of a thing that does not require windows to be open. The window remained closed. The thing was gone. Harry stood over the body. He listened. The corridor was silent. He bent. He retrieved the wire. He cleaned it on the inside of the dead man's robe. He coiled it. He put it in his pocket. He pulled the cloak back over himself. He walked back along the corridor, down the stairs, through 3 other corridors he had memorized, to the door of the Slytherin dormitory, into the room with the 4 other boys, into his bed. The 4 other boys had not moved. The boy in the next bed was snoring lightly. Harry lay on his back. He looked at the canopy of the 4-poster. He listened to his own breathing slow. The named emotion that crossed his face in the dark behind the curtains of the 4-poster was focus. He had felt it in a cabin in Chechnya. He had felt it on a roof in Hell's Kitchen. He felt it now. It was a kind of calm. It was a kind of cold. He sat with it. He did not look away. In the morning, the body was discovered. In the morning, the headmaster called the deputy headmistress to his office. In the morning, the deputy headmistress called Harry. Harry in the office answered 3 questions and accepted no tea. He said with a small, polite smile that did not reach the eyes that he had been asleep at midnight and that the prefect of his dormitory could confirm. He said that he was sorry to hear about the professor. He said that he hoped the school would find a replacement quickly because defense was a subject he had been looking forward to. The headmaster looked at him for a long moment. The headmaster's eyes were the color of winter sky. The headmaster did not on this occasion ask him any of the questions the headmaster most wanted to ask. The headmaster said, "Thank you, Mr. Castle, you may go." Harry inclined his head. He went. In the corridor outside the headmaster's office, a small woman in a pointed hat watched him walk past. She did not then or later ask where he had learned to incline his head like an officer. He wrote to Frank that night in the code. Subject neutralized. Wraith departed through closed window south. Recommend research Wraith. Recommend find every place it might land. Recommend list of names of subject's former associates. List to follow upon return at summer. 1 name down. Frank 3 days later in reply acknowledged, "Holiday is over, welcome back to the work. Good boy, now read your books." Harry read his books. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, The Man and the 3 Broomsticks. The summer between Harry's first and second years at Hogwarts was spent in Belfast in the cottage above the rocky beach with Quinn. Quinn had aged. He had aged the way men age when they live in a stone cottage on the western coast of a small wet country, slowly and then in one season more than the others. His hands were the same. His patience was the same. He looked at Harry on the doorstep at the end of June and said, in the dense accent that had not in 12 months become any less dense, "You've grown, son, show me your hands." Harry showed his hands. Quinn looked at them. Quinn looked at the small healed scars along the inside of the left index where in Chechnya Rustem had taught him to thread detonator caps. Quinn looked at the calluses on the right palm in the place where the wire handle had pressed. Quinn did not, when he looked at the calluses, say a word. He patted the hands the way he had patted them the first time and stepped aside and let the boy in. They worked that summer on a curriculum Quinn had designed in the spring after Frank had written him a careful letter. The curriculum was close quarters, knife in hand. Wire work refined. Disarms against an opponent with a wand. Disarms against an opponent with 2 wands. Disarms against an opponent with a long-bladed weapon. The recovery position. The application of pressure to a femoral wound by a man twice your weight. The reading of a doorway in a house you have never been in. The reading of a stairwell in a building of which you have only seen the outside. Frank flew over twice during the summer. He sat at Quinn's kitchen table on the second visit and watched the boy through the small window onto the yard, and Quinn watched Frank watching. "He's quicker than he was," Quinn said. "I noticed. He's softer in the eye. He's 11. He's 11 and he killed a man in Russia and a man in a tower in Scotland. He's not 11 the way other boys are 11. He sleeps, he eats. He laughs at microchips jokes occasionally. He is 11, he is also other things. The 11 is the part I am paying attention to." Quinn looked at him for a while. Quinn said, "You're a better father to him than you give yourself credit for, Frank." Frank did not answer. "And you're a worse father than any of us are willing to say out loud." Frank, after a moment, drank his tea and answered, "I know." The second year at Hogwarts began on paper with the announcement that a new Defense Against the Dark Arts professor had been appointed. The new professor was a man named Gilderoy Lockhart, who wore lilac robes and turquoise robes by turn, and who arrived at the welcome feast accompanied by a small column of his own publicity. Harry, watching him from the Slytherin table, ran the assessment in under 4 minutes and filed the man under irrelevant. The man could not, on observation, perform any of the spells he claimed to have invented. The man's hands shook when he held a teacup. The man did not understand the geometry of a room he had entered. Harry in his weekly letter wrote, "The new subject is a peacock, not a threat, not a hindrance, possibly a distraction, recommend ignore." Frank in reply acknowledged, "Watch the school, there is a second piece on the board this year." The headmaster sent a letter through Microchip's owl asking for a meeting with you in October. Take the meeting, listen more than you talk, report. The headmaster's office was at the top of a spiral staircase guarded by a stone gargoyle. Gargoyle stepped aside on the password lemon sherbet, which Harry registered as both a deliberate choice and a small joke at his own expense, made by a man who knew he had been read. The headmaster was sitting behind a wide oak desk with 2 phoenix feathers and an inkwell and a small silver instrument turning slowly on its stand. He stood when Harry entered. He came around the desk. He gestured to a tartan cushioned chair. "Mr. Castle, thank you for coming." "Sir, tea." "No, sir, thank you." The headmaster sat. He looked at Harry across the desk for several seconds. The look was, Harry registered, neither the look of a teacher nor the look of an interrogator. It was the look of a man examining a piece of equipment that had been built to a specification he had not been consulted on, and trying to determine from the outside the use to which the piece of equipment had been put. "You have come to my school," the headmaster said, "with a name that does not match the name on the original register. With a hand that holds a wand the way an older man holds a tool he has been using for 40 years. With a friendship for Miss Granger that her mother has written to me about in 3 letters of mild bewilderment. With last year a body in a corridor whose explanation the official record has been content to leave at the word sudden cardiac event in a man with a poor diet. Yes, sir. I would like to ask you some questions. You may decline to answer any of them. If you decline to answer them, I will not press. Yes, sir. Where is the man who raised you? In New York, sir. What is his name? Castle, sir. His first name." Harry considered. He said, "Francis. Francis, a good name." "Is your stepfather, Mr. Castle, the sort of man whom we here would have records of?" "You would not, sir. He has been careful." "Has he taught you?" "He has taught me, sir." "What has he taught you?" Harry in the chair looked at the headmaster levelly. He said with the small polite smile that did not reach the eyes, "He has taught me to read, sir. He has taught me to think. He has taught me to be useful." The headmaster was silent for a long moment. He looked at the small silver instrument turning on its stand. He looked back at Harry. "And the man in the corridor," he said, "last December." Harry waited. "I do not, Mr. Castle, intend to make a record. I intend only to know." "Was he the first?" Harry considered the question carefully. He considered honesty. He considered the cost of honesty. He considered the cost of dishonesty in the long view with a man whose eyes were the color of winter sky and whose questions came in a particular order. "No, sir." The headmaster closed his eyes briefly. He opened them. "How many?" "2 before him, sir. One in self-defense in a cabin in the mountains. One in the line of work in a city in the eastern United States 3 years ago, observed from a corner across the street. The man in the corridor was the third I had been near. He was the first I had taken myself." "Will there be more?" "Yes, sir." "Why?" "Because there is a man in the world who killed my mother and my father, and he is not dead, and he is hunting. And because there are men around him who do to other children what my aunt and uncle did to me and worse, and because someone has to do the work. And that someone is you. That someone is us, sir." The headmaster looked at the silver instrument. The headmaster after a long moment said very quietly, "I have spent a long life, Mr. Castle, hoping that the someone would be me. I have made many mistakes in the service of that hope. I do not wish to make another." "Yes, sir." "If I were to ask you to stop, if I were to ask you to leave the work to us, to the ministry, to the people whose job on paper this is," Harry waited, "what would you say?" Harry in the tartan chair looked at the headmaster and the small polite smile faded and something colder and more careful settled behind his eyes. He said, "I would say, sir, that the people whose job this is on paper failed my mother, they failed my father, they failed me twice. Once when they left me on a doorstep with the people who put me in the cupboard, once when they did not after that come to check. I do not, sir, intend to fail in the same way. I am sorry." The headmaster looked at him for a long, long moment. The headmaster said, "I see. Yes, sir. You will continue. Yes, sir. You will continue in my school while I watch you continue." "Yes, sir." Headmaster nodded slowly. He stood, Harry stood. The headmaster came around the desk. He laid a hand very lightly on Harry's shoulder and looked down at the boy and said, "Mr. Castle, I will not stop you. I do not know yet whether I can, I do not know yet whether I should, but I would ask you one thing only. Yes, sir, be careful when you can of the people who are not on the list, be careful when you can of the bystanders, be careful when you can of the small. There is a kind of work you do that, when it is done by other men, eats them. I would prefer it did not eat you." Harry inclined his head once. "Yes, sir." He left. In the corridor outside the gargoyle, he stood for half a minute with one hand on the cold stone wall and made himself breathe slowly, the way Rustem had taught him to breathe when he had been hauling himself up a snowfield with frozen lungs. Then he walked back to the Slytherin dormitory in the dungeons, and he wrote the meeting up in code that night by candle, and he sent the letter to Frank with the school owl at first light. The Chamber of Secrets opened in November. Harry registered the writing on the wall, "Petrified Mrs. Norris, threatening Latin," within the first hour. He registered the geometry, a school built over a sewer system, a creature that paralyzed with a look, a victim found stiff on a flooded floor. He went that night to the library and he took down the Encyclopedia of Magical Creatures M to Z, and he found the entry for basilisk. He read it twice. He took the encyclopedia back to the table where Hermione was sitting with 3 books open in front of her and a small frown on her face, and he set it down between them. Hermione. "Yes, Harry, the thing in the school is a basilisk." Hermione looked at him, she thought about it. She turned the encyclopedia toward her, she read the entry, she turned to him. "You're right. Latin on the wall, the hens that died, Mrs. Norris on a wet floor, the reflection in the puddle, it's a basilisk. It is. It travels through the pipes. It does. Then we have to tell a professor." Harry looked at her. He said very carefully with the small polite smile that did not with her ever quite reach the eyes, "We have to tell the right professor." Hermione considered this. She closed the encyclopedia. She said, "All right." She did not then or later ask who the right professor was. She had registered in the year and a half of their friendship that Harry's category of right professor was a more complicated category than any of her other categories. She accepted it. She accepted also the unspoken corollary, which was that she was not, at this point, going to be told. They went after curfew to the office of the deputy headmistress, and Harry told the deputy headmistress, on the basis of a sentence Hermione had spoken in the library, and a piece of small reasoning Harry was content to attribute to Hermione, that he believed the creature in the school was a basilisk, and that the basilisk traveled through the pipes, and that the entrance was, on the basis of 3 observations Harry described in a deliberately bland order. Very likely in the girls' toilet on the 2nd floor where Moaning Myrtle haunted. The deputy headmistress listened. The deputy headmistress did not ask why a second year had been thinking about these things. The deputy headmistress thanked them and sent them back to bed, and went that night to the headmaster's office and did not come down before sunrise. Harry in his dorm bed wrote a brief letter in the code and sent it at first light with the school owl, and the owl returned 2 evenings later with a small parcel wrapped in oiled cloth. The parcel contained 4 boxes of 9mm ammunition, hollow point, frangible tipped, of the kind designed not to overpenetrate a target. It also contained a small note in Frank's hand, for the snake, "Don't shoot a portrait, don't shoot a student." 2 in the head, the eyes are reflective. Where the goggles? The goggles were in the bottom of the parcel. They had been adapted by microchip from a pair of cheap motorcycle goggles by the application of a film of polarized acetate and a strip of black tape on the inner rim. The film did not, in any meaningful sense, prevent a person from being killed by the look of a basilisk. The film, however, in the application of a small piece of magic microchip, had paid Eileen Travers in Queens to inscribe along the edge of the acetate, did make the eyes of the wearer, when seen by the basilisk, appear to it as a closed pair of eyes. The basilisk, looking at a wearer of these goggles, would not, on the encyclopedia's authority, deploy the killing gaze. It would deploy instead the teeth. The teeth were a separate problem. Harry was prepared for the teeth. He had read 3 books on the subject. He went into the chamber on a Thursday night in February. He went alone, although Hermione had asked twice with a quiet politeness that was the form her dread took, to be allowed to come. He had said number. He had explained briefly that the geometry of the chamber was a one-man job, and that 2 people in a tunnel would foul each other's lines, and that in any case if he did not come back by morning she was to go to the deputy headmistress and tell her exactly which sink he had gone down. Hermione had filed this. Hermione had agreed. Hermione had not in the next 3 weeks asked again. He went down the pipe in the girls' toilet at 22:10. He carried on his person a small flashlight clipped to the front of his school sweater, the motorcycle goggles fitted under his glasses. A 9mm pistol microchip had got into the country in the false bottom of a hollowed Bible that Eileen Travers had taught him to charm against the custom spells. 3 magazines of the frangible-tipped rounds in a chest rig hidden under the school robe. The wire in the pocket. The holly wand in the other pocket. A small canvas sack containing 2 of Quinn's flat throwing knives, balanced for an arm of his length. The chamber was very large. The chamber smelled of damp stone and old water. The chamber had at its far end a stone statue of a man with a long beard whose mouth, on the appropriate command in the language of snakes, opened. The basilisk came out of the mouth. Harry in the lee of a pillar watched. The thing was about 60 feet long, it was wider than a man, its scales were the color of dark moss, its eyes were the color of acid yellow. The eyes did not, when they fell on him, do what they had done to the cat. The thing reared, the thing struck. The strike came at 25 miles per hour low along the floor, the head coming up in the last instant. Harry in the lee of the pillar fired. He fired twice in 3/4 of a second. The first round went into the upper jaw, into the bone behind the fangs. The second went into the eye, the right eye low, at the angle Rustem had taught him to fire on a man whose head was coming up out of cover. The basilisk's head snapped sideways into the pillar. The pillar took a piece of the basilisk's skull off with it. The thing thrashed. Harry was already moving 3 steps along the wall, his back not in line with the head. The basilisk found him by sound. The thing came again. Harry fired 3 more times, 2 rounds into the upper plate of the skull, 1 into the throat. The thing's mouth opened. Harry's last round of the magazine went into the open mouth at the angle of the soft palate and went up. The thing collapsed at his feet. Its tail thrashed twice. It was still. Harry stood with the smoking pistol in his hand, his back to the pillar, his eyes under the goggles still on the head of the snake. He waited a full 30 seconds before he stepped forward. He reloaded. He kicked the open jaw closed with 1 boot. He bent. He drew one of Quinn's flat throwing knives. He cut the smallest of the fangs out of the upper jaw, 2-handed, working the blade in the gum line and breaking the fang at its root. He wrapped the fang in a square of cotton and put it in the canvas sack. He took also a slow, careful sample of the venom on the cotton. He took finally the small notebook he had not been carrying, which had appeared on a stone bench at the foot of the statue, written in by an 11-year-old girl whose name Harry had not at that point heard, and into which a different writer had begun in the past 3 months to write back. The notebook he handled with care. He did not, on his own initiative, open it. He took it from the bench in the cotton square in which he had wrapped the fang. He put it in the sack with the fang, and he did not, on his way out of the chamber, set the sack down once. He climbed the pipe with the canvas sack over his shoulder and the pistol in the small of his back. He came up through the sink at 0340. He went to the deputy headmistress's office. He knocked. He waited. The door opened in her dressing gown. "Mr. Castle," she said. "Ma'am, the basilisk is dead. The chamber is empty. The entrance is in the second-floor girls' toilet behind the sink with the small snake on the tap. I have also an artifact that should not be touched by a person who does not understand what it is." She looked at him. She looked at the canvas sack. She did not ask him how he had killed the basilisk. She put on her shoes. She went with the boy up the spiral staircase to the office of the headmaster. The headmaster, in his nightshirt and dressing gown, took the notebook from Harry with the care of a man taking a live grenade. He looked at it. He looked at Harry. He did not ask. He set the notebook in a steel box on his desk, and he closed the lid, and he turned a small key, and he placed both hands on the lid for a moment as if anchoring it. He said, "Mr. Castle, the basilisk. 2 in the head, sir. 2 in the upper jaw, 1 in the throat, 1 in the soft palate. I kept the smallest fang. I have a venom sample. I thought you might want them." The headmaster looked at the canvas sack. The headmaster nodded once. "Yes," he said, "I might, Mr. Castle, thank you. Yes, sir. Go to bed." "Yes, sir." Harry went to bed. The deputy headmistress on the way down the spiral staircase said only, "Good night, Mr. Castle." Harry inclined his head. He went to bed. He slept 5 hours. In the morning the headmaster announced at breakfast that the chamber had been closed, that the petrified students would, with the help of the matron, be revived within the week, and that the school was, on his personal authority, again safe. He did not name the killer of the basilisk. He did not anywhere in the speech mention Harry. Harry, eating an apple at the Slytherin table, registered the absence with appreciation. Hermione, at the Gryffindor table, looked at him once. He inclined his head a fraction, she inclined hers a fraction. The thing was filed. The summer between his 2nd year and his 3rd year was the summer Sirius Black broke out of Azkaban. The news reached Microchip's network on the 20th of August. Microchip flew to Belfast on the 22nd. He sat at Quinn's kitchen table with Frank and Harry and Quinn, and he laid out in his careful pacing way what he had pieced together from a ministry leak and 3 intercepted memoranda and a phone call to a man in the British Home Office who did not know that his phone on certain Tuesdays was not entirely his own. He's a wizard. He was an order man during the First War. He's accused of selling out the boy's parents to the Dark Lord. He killed 12 muggles and a man named Pettigrew on a public street in 1981. He has been in Azkaban for 12 years. He is, according to the official record, the most dangerous wizard at large in the British Isles. The official record is going to ask the school to take protective measures. Harry in the chair had been turning a pencil over in his fingers. He stopped turning the pencil. He said, "Micro. Yes. There is something wrong with that story. There is. 12 muggles, 1 wizard on a public street with one of the most powerful curses they have. Sirius Black is in the file as a strong duelist. The strongest duelist would not need 12 muggles to kill 1 wizard. The strongest duelist in 1981 would have killed the wizard quietly behind a door with no witnesses. 12 muggles on the street tells me the explosion was on the wizard's side. Pettigrew set off the curse. Pettigrew is the one in the wind." Frank looked at him. "Go on, son. Pettigrew was the boy's parents' friend in the file. Pettigrew was the secret keeper. Or Pettigrew was Black and Black was Pettigrew. Either way, the man who is missing is the man you want. The man in Azkaban is the wrong man." Microchip looked at the others. "He may be," Microchip said. "He may very well be. I have a contact at the Department of Mysteries who has been telling me, for 3 months, the same thing in a different language. I have not been able to get it to a desk that would do anything with it. The British Ministry of Magic is going to hunt Sirius Black, and they are going to find him and they are going to put him back in Azkaban or kiss him, and the man named Pettigrew is going to spend 12 more years in a hole somewhere, and so is the man behind Pettigrew, and so is the work." Frank stood up. Frank looked at the chart on Quinn's kitchen wall on which Quinn had drawn in slow, patient pencil a list of names that Frank had built with him over the spring. Frank looked at the third name from the top. The third name from the top was PTTIJERRY, and beside it in Frank's smaller handwriting were the 3 words "remains to be." Frank picked up a pencil. Frank drew a line through the 3 words. Frank wrote beside them in the same small, careful hand the single word "located." "All right," he said. "I'll come to Scotland." Frank Castle arrived in Hogsmeade on the 2nd weekend of October. He arrived through a magical transit office that Microchip had identified as the only apparition point in the village whose logs were not, on a particular Saturday, audited by the ministry. He had been escorted to the office in London by Eileen Travers, who had not enjoyed the trip and who, on parting, had said to him, "Mr. Castle, do not, when you are inside the school, speak Latin within 50 feet of any portrait. The portraits report." She had nodded once. She had gone. Frank had walked from the apparition point through the cobbled high street to the 3 Broomsticks, which was the largest pub in the village, and which, on the 2nd weekend of October, was the pub a man visiting the village from London would be most likely to drink in. He had taken a seat at a corner table with his back to the wall and a clear sightline to the door. He had ordered a pint of dark beer and a plate of bread and cheese. He had not eaten the bread. Severus Snape came in at 1920. He was a tall man in black robes that had been cut to disguise the line of his shoulders. He moved through the room without disturbing it. His eyes went to every corner of the pub in a sweep of 2 seconds, and they stopped for half a beat on the table where Frank Castle was sitting with his back to the wall. Snape walked to the bar. He ordered a small whiskey. He paid in coin. He turned. He walked without hurry to Frank's table. He set the whiskey on the table. He drew out the chair opposite Frank and he sat. "Mr. Castle," Snape said, "Professor." The 2 men looked at each other across the small round table. Snape did not extend a hand. Frank did not extend a hand. The pub continued around them, the low roar of weekend drinkers and the clatter of mugs and the small clean smells of wood smoke and wet wool. "Your boy," Snape said, "is the most interesting student I have had since I was in school." "My boy is not yours, Professor." "I am aware, Mr. Castle. I am his head of house. The interest in question is professional, not paternal. I require nothing more from your boy than that he survive my class. He survives my class. He survives also several other classes. I am, in fact, content." Frank watched him. Snape's voice did not vary in pitch. Snape's hand on the small whiskey did not shake. Snape's eyes were, like a great many things Frank had encountered in his work, the color of a thing that did not want to be looked at directly. "You have come, Mr. Castle, to Hogsmeade. You have not come to look at the architecture. I will ask with such politeness as I have what you have come to do. There is a man at large, Professor, who killed my boy's parents. That man is dispersed." "There is a man at large, Professor, who carries the man who killed my boy's parents on the back of his head. That man is dead. The boy killed him in a corridor at 3 in the morning 10 months ago. The man who matters is in a hole somewhere in a body that is not a body and is waiting for a body that will be a body. That man, Professor, requires hands. A man without hands is not a man. He is a screaming wraith. I am here to do work on the hands. Snape watched him. I see. Peter Pettigrew, Professor, you know the name. I know the name. You know more than the name. Snape was silent. You know, Professor, that Pettigrew is not dead. You know it because Sirius Black is in Azkaban for the murder of Pettigrew, and you have spent 12 years not believing that Sirius Black murdered Pettigrew. You will not say it on the record, Professor, and you will not be required to. I am not asking you for the record, I am asking you for the location. Snape very slowly lifted the small whiskey. He looked at it against the lamplight. He set it down without drinking. He said, Mr. Castle, I am a teacher in a school. I have on my conscience things I do not in a country pub in the Highlands of Scotland propose to discuss. I will not, however, have on my conscience the protection of the rat. He is in the school, Mr. Castle. He has been in the school for 12 years. He sleeps in a Gryffindor dormitory. He is, at present, the pet of the youngest son of the Weasley family. He is an unregistered animagus. His form is a rat. He is missing a toe on the right forepaw, the same toe which, when his master cut it off in a London side street in 1981, was placed beside a body that was not a body and called by the official record all that remained of him. Frank looked at Snape. That is a great deal of detail, Professor. It is a great deal that I would rather not carry, Mr. Castle. You will dispose of it. I will be elsewhere when you do. I will. You will not, when you do, leave a body in this school that I have to clean up. I will not. You will not involve your boy in this. Frank looked at him. My boy is involved, Professor. My boy has been involved since the night he was put in a cupboard. I will not, however, ask my boy to handle the rat himself. The rat is mine. I am here to take him. Snape inclined his head a fraction. I will see to it that the youngest Weasley boy is at the Quidditch match in Hogsmeade tomorrow afternoon, and that the rat is left in his bag in the Gryffindor common room. The fat lady will let in any boy in red and gold who knows the password. The password is Balderdash. The bag is the third bag in the rack to the left of the fireplace. You will have, by my count, 23 minutes before the prefect on duty comes back from the match. Thank you, Professor. Do not thank me, Mr. Castle. I will not. You will not, on leaving this pub, look back at this table. I will not. Snape rose. He left the small whiskey on the table. He walked out of the Three Broomsticks in the same unhurried manner he had walked in. Frank Castle finished his pint of dark beer. He set the empty glass on the table. He paid in the appropriate coin. He left through the front door. He did not look back at the table. The taking of Peter Pettigrew happened the following afternoon at 15:11, in a back staircase of the Gryffindor Tower, on the half landing between the third and fourth floors, after a fat ginger rat with a missing toe on its right forepaw had been removed from the third bag in the rack to the left of the fireplace in the Gryffindor common room by a man in a long black coat, and an expression that no one in the common room at 15:03 was inclined to challenge. Frank carried the rat in a cloth bag down the back staircase to the half landing. He set the bag on the stone step. He drew a small iron key from his pocket, which Microchip had got from a contact in Bratislava 3 years earlier and which had been confirmed by Eileen Travers to function as what it appeared to function as. He laid the iron key on top of the bag. He stepped back. The rat in the bag made a single high noise. The rat in the bag became, in the manner of an animagus compelled by cold iron to resume his original form, a small balding man in a torn robe, with a missing finger on the right hand and an expression that Frank had seen on the faces of a long list of men, all of whom were now dead. Please, the small balding man said. Please, please, I didn't, Peter Pettigrew. Please, 12 muggles, James Potter, Lily Potter. He made me, hee. Frank Castle shot Peter Pettigrew twice in the chest with a suppressed Walther PPK. He shot him once more in the head after the second round. He retrieved the iron key. He picked up the cloth bag, which now contained nothing but a torn robe and a finger that had been missing for 12 years. He went down the back staircase. He went out of the castle by the side door Snape had told him about. He walked to the apparition point in Hogsmeade. He arrived in London at 16:01. Sirius Black was, 3 weeks later, found by an Auror named Kingsley Shacklebolt sleeping in a cave above the village of Hogsmeade in the form of a black dog. He was brought in. He was held for questioning. He gave, under questioning, an account of the events of October 31, 1981 that, when compared with the body of one Peter Pettigrew found in a back staircase of Gryffindor Tower 3 weeks earlier under circumstances no one in the official record had been able to make sense of, produced, at the desk of the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, a quiet decision to release Sirius Black with apologies, and the small pension of a man unjustly imprisoned. And to close the file, Harry visited Sirius Black on the second weekend of November. Sirius was thin, Sirius was gray at the temples. Sirius had in his eyes the look of a man who had been hauled out of a hole by a hand he could not see and did not yet know whether to thank or fear. They sat in the kitchen of a London house Sirius had inherited and not in 12 years set foot in. They drank tea. They talked in fits about James and Lily. Sirius did not on the visit ask the boy directly how Peter Pettigrew had come to be dead on a back staircase. Sirius perhaps had worked out the geometry. Sirius perhaps had not. Sirius accepted with what was, for him, a quiet patience that had not existed in him before Azkaban that he was not going to be told. When Harry left, Sirius walked him to the door. Sirius said, "Your father would be proud of you, Harry." Harry inclined his head. "Thank you, sir. Don't call me sir." "Yes, Sirius. Yes, Sirius." The boy went down the steps into the dim winter afternoon. Sirius stood in the doorway and watched him go. He stood there longer than was warm. He went inside. He closed the door. In the apartment on West 47th Street that Christmas, Frank Castle sat at the kitchen counter with a cup of black coffee and watched Microchip cross off, with a thick black marker, the name Pettigrew, P on the chart on the wall. There were 13 names left. The named emotion Frank carried that winter in the small hours in the lamp light off the street that came through the cracked sash was vigilance. He recognized it the way he recognized the smell of cordite and the smell of cold rain. He sat with it. He did not look away. In Scotland, in a four-poster bed in the Slytherin dungeons, a 13-year-old boy with green eyes lay on his back with the curtains drawn and the small leather pouch under his pillow and the holly wand on the table beside him, and he listened to the breathing of the other 4 boys in the room, and he ran the chart in his head and he subtracted Pettigrew and he slept. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5, Field Exercises. The Triwizard Tournament was announced at the welcome feast on the 1st of September of Harry's 4th year, and Harry, eating a roast potato at the Slytherin table, registered the announcement the way he had registered in years past the briefing on a piece of operational terrain. He filed each detail, 3 schools, 3 champions, 3 tasks, an age line drawn around the goblet intended to exclude any student under 17. A judging panel that included the heads of all 3 schools and 2 senior ministry officials. A new defense professor, a retired orar by the name of Alistair Moody, called in his earlier career by the various names men give to a man who has done a great deal of work and survived. He watched the new defense professor for the duration of the feast. The man drank from a hip flask at 5-minute intervals. The man's blue magical eye did not, on a single occasion in 2 hours, look in the direction Moody's biological eye was looking. The man's left leg, ending in a wooden peg, was held at a position 1 degree off the position a man with 20 years' habit of a wooden leg would have held it. The man's hands were the hands of a man who had used wands and not, in the recent past, weapons that required a grip. Harry wrote in his weekly letter to Frank in the code, "New subject is wrong. Wooden leg held 1 degree off old habit angle. Hip flask at 5-minute intervals, contents not whiskey on the smell at 20 feet. Eye scans the head table the way a man scans cover, not the way a man teaches. Probable subject is a covered man. Probable cover is the long-form drink in the flask. Recommend research what the long-form drink is." Frank, in reply 3 days later, acknowledged Microchip is researching, likely candidate, polyjuice potion, brewed every hour. Drinker is impersonating the real Moody. The real Moody is in a hole somewhere on the grounds, alive, milked for hair. Find the hole. Do not move on the imposter before the 3rd task. The imposter is going to use the 3rd task to move the boy somewhere a wraith can be made into a body. We want the wraith. We want the place. We want all of it. Harry filed the letter. He did the math. He understood. He went, in the 2nd week of October, on a long afternoon walk along the perimeter of the grounds, and he counted outbuildings. He counted 7, of which 6 were on the school's published map. The 7th was a small stone hut 120 yards from the back wall of the greenhouse, half buried in the slope of the hill, with a single small chimney that smoked at half past every hour from October through April, in a pattern that, when he laid it on the polyjuice brewing cycle Microchip had got him from a contact in Belgium, fit. He did not go to the hut. He did not need to go to the hut. The hut was a piece of operational ground he could find on a moonless night with his eyes closed. He logged it. He waited. The goblet of fire, when the moment came, picked 4 names instead of 3. The fourth name in green ink in the hand Harry had registered in the address on his first Hogwarts letter was H.J. Castle. There was a long silence in the hall. Harry at the Slytherin table did not stand up, he waited. The headmaster behind the staff table said very slowly, "Mr. Castle, to the antechamber if you please." Harry stood up. He walked the length of the hall. He felt the eyes on him, the Slytherin eyes which were calculating, the Gryffindor eyes which were various, the Hufflepuff eyes which were uneasy, the Ravenclaw eyes which were curious. He felt Hermione's eyes which were, when he passed the Gryffindor table, simply attentive. He felt the eyes of the staff table. He inclined his head a fraction toward the headmaster as he passed. The headmaster inclined a fraction back. The exchange took a quarter of a second. No one in the hall noticed it. In the antechamber, the three champions were standing near a small fire. The Beauxbatons girl, a quarter-villa called Fleur de Lacquer, looked at him with a small, impatient curiosity. The Durmstrang boy, a Bulgarian named Victor Krum, looked at him with the long, flat patience of a man who had also been put in places he had not chosen to be in. The Hogwarts champion, a Hufflepuff named Cedric Diggory, looked at him with the open friendliness of a person who had not, in his short life, encountered a problem he could not work out by being decent about it. Harry liked all three immediately and filed all three immediately, and resolved that none of the three would be in the line of fire of any work he did between now and the end of the tournament. The judges arrived. The judges asked. Harry answered, in the small, even voice he had learned in Quinn's kitchen, that he had not put his name in the goblet, that he did not know how it had been put in, that he was willing to compete if the binding magic of the goblet required him to compete, and that he intended, if he competed, to do so without injuring any of the other three champions in any way that mattered. He used the phrase "in any way that mattered." The judges looked at each other. The Beauxbatons' headmistress laughed once, a short, surprised laugh. The headmaster of Hogwarts said, "The binding magic does, in fact, require him to compete. Mr. Castle is a champion. The tournament will proceed." The judges left. The four champions stood by the fire. Cedric, after a moment, extended a hand to Harry. "Welcome to the trouble, Castle." Harry shook the hand. Krum looked at Harry for a long moment and said in his careful Bulgarian English, "You are very young." Harry inclined his head. "I am, sir," Fleur said in a tone that was not unkind. "You will be killed, little one." Harry said with the small polite smile that did not with her reach the eyes. "We will see, mademoiselle." He went back to the dungeon. He wrote the letter that night. He laid out in the code what he had registered. He named the most likely entrant, who was the imposter in the moody body. He named the most likely purpose, which was to get him to the place where the wraith could be made a man. He named the recommended response, which was to play it straight, complete the tasks cleanly, identify the place at the appropriate moment, and let the tournament hand him to the wraith at the time of the wraith's choosing. Frank, 3 days later, in reply, acknowledged, "Play it straight. We will move at the third task. I will be in country at the end of May. Microchip is on the wraith. Eileen Travers is on the place. Quinn is on Belfast. The list is in motion. Read your books." The first task was the dragons. The four champions drew their dragons from a small velvet bag in a small striped tent in the lee of the stands. Harry drew the Hungarian horntail, which Cedric, on hearing, made a small noise of sympathy at, and which Fleur, on hearing, looked at him with something like apology in her eyes. He read the small description on the back of the model dragon. Most aggressive of the four, tail covered with bony spikes capable of penetrating dragonhide armor, wingspan 12 meters, weight at maturity 2.5 tons. The task was to retrieve a golden egg from a clutch under the dragon's belly without inflicting permanent injury on the dragon, and to do so within a window of 1 hour. Harry in the tent ran the analysis the way Rustam had taught him to run an analysis. The dragon's weight was distributed 3/4 on the rear legs, 1/4 on the front. The wing roots where the wing met the shoulder were the load points for flight. A dragon on the ground with both wing roots locked could not generate lift. A dragon that could not generate lift was a 50-foot crocodile on legs. A 50-foot crocodile on legs in a circular arena 50 yards across was a 50-foot crocodile that, given the right footwork, could be made to face the wrong way for the time it took to walk past it. He took, into the arena, the holly wand and a small cloth bag of objects he had been quietly preparing for 3 weeks. 2 flares of a kind microchip had got for him in a hardware store in Queens, modified by Eileen Travers to produce, on detonation, a sound that no dragon's inner ear had been designed to enjoy. A small 10-pound brick of clay and wax compound, also modified, which on application to a wing root would set in 3 seconds and prevent that wing root from extending for the next 20 minutes. A second brick for the second wing, a spare, nothing more. He walked out of the tent into the noise of the stands. The horntail came at him at 20 miles per hour out of a coiled spring crouch, the head low, the tail high, the wings half spread. Harry stepped sideways into the rocky outcrop on the south side of the arena, set off the first flare with his left hand, and threw the first wax brick at the right wing root with his right. The flare went off behind the dragon's head and made the noise that no dragon had been designed to enjoy. The dragon's head whipped sideways. The brick struck the wing root and adhered and set. The dragon, in the same motion, swept its tail across the south arena and brought down a section of the rocky outcrop. Harry was on the north side of the outcrop by the time the section came down. He set off the second flare. The dragon's head whipped the other way. Harry threw the second brick at the left wing root. It struck, it set. The dragon, now grounded, attempted lift. The wings did not extend. The dragon, in its surprise, attempted again. The wings did not extend. The dragon, on its fourth attempt, made a noise that no one in the stands had heard from a dragon before, a noise of structural confusion. Harry walked in the lee of the rocks around the arena perimeter. He kept the outcrop between himself and the dragon's head. He did not run, he walked. He arrived at the clutch of eggs at the far side of the arena. He bent. He picked up the golden egg. He turned. He walked back in the same unhurried manner with the outcrop again between himself and the dragon. He left the arena through the side gate at 5 minutes and 41 seconds. The crowd in the stands did not at first react. The crowd registered in stages that the youngest champion had walked out of the arena in 5 minutes and 41 seconds with the egg and an unbroken horntail behind him, whose wings had been quietly removed from operational use. The crowd, on the registration, made a noise that began as a long collective in breath and became, in pieces, a cheer. The judges on the panel conferred. The judges, after some discussion, gave him 40 points out of a possible 50. The Beauxbatons headmistress voted 45. The Durmstrang headmaster voted 35. The senior ministry official, Bartimus Crouch Sr., voted 38 and said on the record that the use of Muggle pyrotechnics on the grounds of Hogwarts was not in the spirit of the tournament. The headmaster of Hogwarts voted 45 and did not, when the votes were tallied, say anything more. Harry took 40 points. He inclined his head. He went back to the dungeon. He wrote up the task in the code that night. He recorded the score. He did not, in the letter, mention the noise of the crowd. The second task in February was the lake. The clue inside the golden egg, screamed in the language of merpeople, was a piece of operational intelligence on the location of a hostage. Who would be? Harry confirmed with 3 days of careful inquiry Hermione Granger, who had been identified by the judging panel as the thing Harry would most miss. The task was to retrieve the hostage from the village of the merpeople, an hour's swim out and down at a depth of 40 feet within a window of 1 hour. Harry, in his dorm, considered the problem. He considered gillyweed, which the helpful house elf Dobby had been instructed by Crouch the impostor to bring him in a small bundle the night before the task. He smiled the small polite smile at Dobby. He thanked Dobby. He put the gillyweed in a jar of salt water and set it on the windowsill where it would, in 12 hours, be as fresh as on the day. He did not use it. He used, instead, the small twin-cylinder rebreather that Microchip had bought in a dive shop in Florida the previous spring, and that had been adapted by Eileen Travers, with 3 small lines of script inscribed along the mouthpiece to reduce the noise of bubbles and to scale to a small child's lung capacity. He used a black neoprene wetsuit. He used a pair of swim fins. He used a small underwater flashlight clipped to a strap on his chest. He used a knife at his belt and the holly wand in a waterproof sleeve along his forearm. He went into the lake at the start signal at 20 seconds past 11 o'clock. He went down at a steady descent of 1 body length per second, the way Rustam had taught him to descend on a fixed line into a fjord. He kicked along the bottom, the silt going up behind his fins in a small cloud, the flashlight on a low beam. He found the village of the merpeople at minute 4. He found the hostages at minute 5. He cut Hermione's bindings with the knife. He looped one arm under her armpit and across her chest in the cross-chest carry. He kicked back along the bottom. He went up on a controlled ascent of 1 body length per 2 seconds. He came up at minute 11. He came out of the lake at minute 12. He set Hermione, who was beginning in the cold to wake, on the wooden dock. He sat beside her on the dock. He breathed. He waited. The other 3 champions came up at, respectively, minute 48, minute 51, and minute 58. Harry got 50 points out of 50. The Durmstrang headmaster, after some thought, voted 45 and said that he disapproved of the use of Muggle equipment in a magical contest. The senior ministry official, Bartimus Crouch Sr., was not present at the judging. The headmaster of Hogwarts looked at Harry across the dais and inclined his head a fraction. Harry inclined his back. Hermione, in the dressing tent while Harry was changing into dry clothes behind a screen, said, "Harry, yes, that was 12 minutes. Yes, and the others were 48 minutes. Yes, and you were never in danger. Number, you did not enjoy it." He thought about this. He pulled on a dry sweater. He said, around the wool of the collar, "I enjoyed the part where you were not anymore tied to a rock at the bottom of a lake." Hermione was silent. "Harry," she said after a moment, "yes. Is your stepfather like you?" He considered the question, he considered the cost of the answer, he considered, as he had considered with the headmaster, the cost of dishonesty in the long view. "Hermione, yes, I am like my stepfather. All right, it is not with us the wrong way round. All right." She did not then or later ask any more questions. She got up and patted his shoulder once, the way Quinn had patted his hands, and she went out into the cold morning, and she did not speak of the question again. The third task was the maze. The maze, which had grown over the spring out of a hedge that had not been a hedge the previous autumn, was a square of thorned green walls in the Quidditch pitch, 400 yards aside, with a single golden cup in the center on a pedestal. The task was to reach the cup. The champion who reached it first would win the tournament. Inside the maze were, by the headmaster's announcement, a number of challenges the champions would have to overcome. By Harry's analysis, conducted from the air over a borrowed broom in the third week of May, the maze was also a long single channel of corridors, with intermittent dead ends and 3 live ones, and a clear path through the center and a clear sight to the cup from a particular angle on the southwest entrance. He went in through the north gate on the night of the 24th of June at 21:03. The first thing he met in the maze was a blast-ended scroot, which he avoided by going around. The second thing was a sphinx who asked him a riddle, the answer to which was the word spider, which he gave. The third thing was a boggart in the shape of a man in a dark cloak with a fan-shaped buckle on his belt, which Harry looked at for 1 second and then walked past. The fourth thing was Cedric Diggory, the Hufflepuff champion, in the act of fighting a Cornish acromantula. Harry, in the channel of the maze, drew the holly wand and the suppressed pistol simultaneously and put 4 rounds into the soft interior segment of the spider, behind the commissary, while Cedric, on the ground, watched. The spider fell sideways. Cedric got up. Cedric looked at Harry. "That was a gun," Cedric said. "It was. You're not supposed to have a gun." "I'm not." "Harry," Cedric, "get up, we have a problem." Cedric got up. Cedric, on the ground, had been more cut about than he was letting on. Harry tied a clean strip of bandage from his belt around Cedric's left forearm. He looked at Cedric's eyes. The eyes were tracking. The pupils were the right size. He had not lost more blood than he could replace. "The cup," Harry said, "is a portkey. It is not the trophy of the tournament. It is going to take whichever one of us touches it to a graveyard in the south of England, where a man we have been hunting for 13 years is going to attempt to use one of us to give himself a body. The other of us is going to be killed at the graveyard within the first 30 seconds of arrival. That is the plan as I have been able to work it out. I have been planning to take the cup on my own and arrive at the graveyard with backup that the man we are hunting does not know about. You are now going to walk back to the entrance of the maze. You are going to come out limping. You are going to tell the judges you stepped on something and twisted an ankle. You are not, on penalty of my displeasure, going to mention me, the gun, the spider, or the cup. You hear me?" Cedric looked at him. "Harry, yes." "Who are you?" "I am a 4th-year Slytherin from New York, Cedric, and I am going to handle this." Cedric thought about it. He looked at the bandage on his left forearm. He looked at Harry. He nodded once. He turned. He went back the way he had come, with a small, deliberate limp that became, after some seconds, an actual limp. Harry waited for the sound of Cedric's footfalls to fade. He moved forward. He met, in the next corridor, the false Moody, who had come into the maze on a perimeter the panel of judges had not been informed of. The false Moody, in a stained black coat, his wooden leg held at a degree off angle, looked at him with the magical blue eye and said, "Good evening, Mr. Castle. You are doing better than my master had anticipated. Take the cup." Harry looked at him. "Sir," he said, "Mr. Castle. Sir, my stepfather has, for some weeks, been 300 yards south of the maze in a small unused groundskeeper's hut with a sniper's rifle and a sight line to the cup pedestal. He has also been in radio contact with a man in Brooklyn who has been monitoring the ambient magical signatures of this maze for the past 4 hours. The ambient signature has, in the last 6 minutes, changed in a way that means the portkey has been activated and is now active. Take the cup, sir, and you go to the graveyard. Take the cup, sir, and you arrive at the graveyard alone with my stepfather's rifle at 800 yards on the man you serve. I would prefer it if you took the cup. The false Moody on the path looked at him. You think a muggle weapon at 800 yards will kill my master? I think 2 suppressed rounds through the temple of a man's head before he can finish whatever resurrection ritual you have planned will inconvenience him very considerably, sir. It will not kill him, perhaps. It will throw him back into the wraith state. It will buy us time. While you and the others present at the graveyard, sir, will be killed by my stepfather and by me in the first 18 minutes with no quarter. The false Moody in the path watched him. You are bluffing, Mr. Castle. I am not, sir, bluffing. I am telling you what is going to happen. I am also telling you, sir, that I have in my left coat pocket a small device that on activation will produce a magical signature identical to that of an activated portkey. In this maze 4 corridors away from here. My stepfather, sir, 300 yards south, has been instructed that if that second signature appears, he is to put 1 round through your knee and 1 through your shoulder, and to wait for me to come and get you before he turns his attention to the graveyard. The second signature, sir, has been active for 2 minutes. The false Moody in the path looked at him for a long time. The false Moody in the path did not draw a wand. The false Moody in the path looked very carefully at the bushes to the southwest of the maze where he could not from inside the maze see anything. Take off the leg, Harry said quietly. Lie face down, hands behind your head, we are going to do this clean. The false Moody took off the leg. The false Moody lay face down. The hands went behind the head. Harry on the path walked forward. He bound the hands with a cord he had been carrying in his coat. He bound the ankles with another cord. He turned the man over. He pulled the magical blue eye out of the socket. He pulled the wig off. He pulled the false skin off. Underneath the false skin was a man in his 30s, gaunt with a fevered look, who had been in Azkaban for 13 years before he had been in this body for 9 months. Barty Crouch Jr. All right, Harry said. All right, sir, we are going to have a talk. The talk, conducted in the small unused groundskeeper's hut on the southwest perimeter of the school, took 90 minutes. Frank Castle in the hut did not speak. Harry in the hut did not raise his voice. The hut contained 1 straight-backed chair, in which Barty Crouch Jr. was seated. It contained, on a small wooden shelf, 3 glass phials labeled in Microchip's small, careful handwriting with the names of 3 different potions, none of which were Veritaserum, all of which had been brewed by Eileen Travers in the previous month with materials Microchip had supplied. The hut contained a kettle. The hut contained a long lamp with a brown shade. The talk produced the following. A graveyard in Little Hangleton in Yorkshire. The precise location of the headstone of 1 Tom Riddle Sr. The names of 7 Death Eaters who were expected to attend the resurrection ritual. The name of the wraith's host body, which was a small, weak, partially regenerated form being carried by Peter Pettigrew, who Crouch Jr. did not at the start of the talk know had been dead for some months and who Harry in the hut did not on principle correct him on. And the time at which the portkey would activate, which was 11:11 p.m. on the night of the 24th of June. When the talk was finished, Barty Crouch Jr. was put into a magical sleep by Frank, who had read 4 chapters of a book on the appropriate spell and had not in his life used a wand before, and he used the spell now with the careful one-handed grip of a man using a tool he understood the function of. The wand had been borrowed from Crouch Jr. himself. The spell took. The young man slept. Frank looked at Harry across the hut. You're sure about the plan? I'm sure, Frank. You walk into the graveyard, you sweep it. I'm at 800 yards on the headstone. Yes. You do not move on the wraith, I move on the wraith, you move on the hands. Yes. Hands first, wraith last. 18 minutes, 18 minutes. You hear me? Yes, Frank, what's the rule? 2 in the chest, sir. What's the second rule? Move. What's the third? Bystanders go home in 1 piece. Good, eat the bar in your coat pocket, you're going to need the sugar. Harry ate the bar. Frank in the hut watched him. The bar was a Cadbury's fruit and nut that Microchip had got him in a corner shop in Hogsmeade that morning. Harry chewed it in small, careful bites. The named emotion Frank carried in the hut as the boy ate the bar was patience. He had been carrying it for 13 years. He had been carrying it through Belfast and Hell's Kitchen and a cabin in the Argun Gorge. He had been carrying it through a corridor on the 3rd floor of a Scottish school in December, through a back staircase in October, through a chamber under a school in February. He had been carrying it through every name Microchip had crossed off the chart on the wall in the apartment on West 47th Street. He carried it for the last hour, then he set it down. Time to go, he said. Harry stood up. He brushed crumbs off his coat. He picked up the small, folded square of cloth that Microchip had charmed to function as a portkey to the precise coordinate Crouch had given them. He looked at Frank. "You taking the cup, Frank?" "I am taking the cup." "You are not, Frank, going to be at the graveyard alone." "I am not, son. 800 yards, 800, 2 in the chest, move." Frank looked at him for a moment, then he reached out and put a hand on the boy's shoulder very briefly, the way a man does to a son who is about to walk down a road that he himself has walked down many times before. 18 minutes, Frank said. 18 minutes, Harry said. They went out of the hut into the warm summer dark. The spring went slowly, in the way operational springs go slowly. Microchip in the apartment on West 47th Street ran for 16 weeks, 3 parallel investigations on 3 separate machines, in a routine he had refined over 12 years. Eileen Travers in her apartment on Astoria Boulevard with 3 cats did the work the machines could not do. She traced on a hand-drawn map of the British Isles the magical signatures of 17 known Death Eaters who had not been seen in public since 1981. She marked in red ink the houses they had owned in the years before the war. She marked in green ink the houses their wives or sisters had owned and which had not in the public record been searched. She marked in black ink the 4 houses that fit the pattern of a man who had wanted to keep a wraith alive for 13 years and would have needed for that purpose the privacy of an ancestral pile and the privacy of an unimpeachable household. 3 of the black ink houses were occupied by old men who had not, on observation, left their houses in 5 years and who could be safely ruled out. The 4th black ink house was the Riddle Place in Little Hangleton, which had no current occupant on the public record and which had, in the previous winter, been visited 4 times by a man in a green and black scarf, whose face Eileen Travers had not been able to put a name to, but whose gait, when she had watched him from a bus stop 200 yards down the road on a Tuesday afternoon in February, was the gait of the gardener at the Malfoy estate. The map went on a wall of the apartment. The map was annotated every Tuesday by Microchip and updated every other Friday by Eileen Travers, who took the train to Manhattan and ate Microchip's pancakes and spoke very little. Frank sat at the kitchen counter on Tuesday and Friday evenings with the coffee and looked at the map and did not in his look betray what he saw on it. The real Mad-Eye Moody on Microchip's analysis was in a trunk. The trunk on Eileen Travers's analysis was a 7-compartment trunk of the kind a paranoid Auror would have brought to a teaching post at Hogwarts, the bottom compartment of which was a cell. The trunk was in the false Moody's office at the school. The real Moody was alive. The real Moody was being milked every 8 hours for hair. The real Moody had been there since the night before the term began, when the false Moody, then merely a boy in Azkaban with a missing father, had come up the front drive of the castle in his predecessor's body. Harry in his weekly letters in the code asked the same question 3 weeks running. Do we extract the real Moody before the 3rd task? Frank 3 weeks running in reply, not yet, he is alive. He is being kept alive because the false Moody requires the hair. The moment we extract him, the false Moody loses the cover. We will extract him on the night of the 3rd task at 21:30 when the false Moody is in the maze with you. Microchip has the trunk key on order. Eileen has the unlock charm. Do not move on the trunk before the night. Harry filed the letter. Harry, on the night of the 24th of June at 21:30, sent Hermione Granger, of all people, with a folded note and a small iron key and a careful set of instructions, into the false Moody's empty office to open the bottom compartment of a 7-compartment trunk. Hermione, who had by the 3rd year stopped asking the questions that other girls asked, and who had by the 4th become a person Harry trusted with operational tasks, opened the compartment, found a starved man with a missing eye and a missing leg, fed him a small bar of chocolate from her pocket, helped him out of the trunk, walked him down to the hospital wing, and told the matron with a small composed face that she had found Professor Moody in a trunk in his own office and that someone should perhaps call the headmaster. The matron called the headmaster. The headmaster came down. The headmaster looked at the man in the bed. The headmaster looked at the small composed girl. The headmaster said very quietly, "Thank you, Miss Granger." He went, by way that the headmaster goes places, to the perimeter of the maze. Sirius Black flew up from London on the morning of the 24th of June, in the form of a black dog, and arrived in the village of Hogsmeade at 15:20, where he was met by a man in a long dark coat at the back door of the Hog's Head, and where he was, after a brief exchange in which the man in the long dark coat established that the dog was the dog he believed it to be, given a long letter from his godson to read in private over a pint of dark beer. The letter, which Sirius read in a back booth of the pub with his back to the door, laid out the plan, the timing, the geometry, the fallback, the rules of engagement, and the request that Sirius on the night, stationed himself on the southern perimeter of the Riddle property with a wand and the long-distance Muggle communications device microchip had taught him to use over the course of 3 Saturdays in May, and to provide rear security and a hot extraction point if the operation went sideways. Sirius read the letter twice. Sirius drank the pint of dark beer. Sirius looked across the booth at the man in the long dark coat. Sirius said in the quiet, slightly hoarse voice he had had since Azkaban, "Mr. Castle, Mr. Black, you have made my godson into a soldier. I have made your godson, sir, into a person who will not, when the war ends tonight, be put back into a cupboard." Sirius looked at him for a long moment. Sirius lifted the empty pint glass. Sirius set it down. Sirius said, "If we both come out of this alive, Mr. Castle, you and I are going to have a long talk." "Yes, sir." "I do not yet know whether the long talk will be friendly." "That is your privilege, sir." Sirius looked at him a moment longer, then he extended a hand across the booth. Frank Castle, after a beat, took it. "On the southern perimeter, then," Sirius said. "At 2300, Frank said. "At 2300. They drank up. They left the pub by separate doors. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6, 18 minutes. The graveyard at Little Hangleton lay on the long shoulder of a hill above the village, ringed by yew trees whose bark had blackened with age and whose branches, in the long summer dusk, hung over the headstones in the disordered drape of curtains that had not been straightened in 100 years. A stone wall ran the perimeter at chest height, breached at the southern gate by a wrought iron arch whose hinges had not, in living memory, been oiled. The headstones on the slope marched up the hill in irregular ranks. At the crest stood the largest stone in the yard, a granite obelisk 7 feet high carved with the name Riddle, and the inscription in Emiamore and a small Roman numeral that had been worn by weather into illegibility. A bronze cauldron the size of a milk pail stood, at the base of the obelisk, on a tripod of black iron whose feet had pressed 3 small wet circles into the soft earth. The cauldron was steaming. Frank Castle, at a place that was not on any map of the village and which, in the previous afternoon, he and Microchip had selected for the angle of its sightline and the depth of its long grass, lay prone on a tarp the color of dry earth, his head down, his right shoulder bedded into the stock of an Accuracy International AWM in 338 Lapua Magnum, his right eye to a Schmidt-Bender 10-power scope that he had zeroed that afternoon at the precise distance of 800 yards on the granite obelisk. The bipod legs of the rifle were buried in the grass to the second adjustment. The suppressor on the muzzle was a 30-centimeter cylinder of titanium that Microchip had bought in Geneva in 1989 and that had been carried since in the false bottom of a violin case. A second magazine sat on the tarp beside Frank's left elbow. A third lay flat against his sternum, inside the coat. Beside the magazines, in a small leather case, lay a single round whose tip had been treated by Eileen Travers with a substance she had taken 3 weeks to prepare and which she had, on handing it to Frank, said only the words for the head, not for the chest. The head. The wind, at 800 yards, was from the southwest at 3 to 4 miles per hour, with a small variable gust at the top of the hill that came every 40 seconds and which Frank had been timing on his wristwatch. The light, going out of the sky in the west, was a thin gold the color of a Christmas medal, which would, in the next 11 minutes, become the iron blue of nautical twilight, and would, in the 11 after that, become a darkness in which the scope's tritium reticle would glow and the iron sights of the AWM would be of no use. Harry Castle, 14 years and 10 months and 24 days old, stepped out of the wrought iron arch of the southern gate at 2311 in the manner of a young man arriving at an appointment. He wore a dark coat. He wore dark trousers. He wore dark, soft-soled boots. He carried, on his person and in his sleeves and along his belt and in the small flat pocket sewn into the inside of his collar, the following objects. The holly wand of his first year, the Walther PPK with the suppressor that had been Frank's in the night of the wrong door, and which Frank had given him after Chechnya as the first piece of equipment that was unambiguously his, 3 magazines for the PPK, a small twin-blade folding knife of Quinn's pattern, which sat clipped to the inside of his right pocket, a 30-foot coil of braided wire of the kind he had used on the troll and on the corridor. A small parcel of fuse cord and 2 pull friction detonators, in case the obelisk did not, when struck, behave as the granite of an obelisk, and a small communications device, in the false ear of his coat collar, through which Microchip in Brooklyn and Sirius Black on the southern perimeter of the property, and Frank in the long grass at 800 yards, were each able to hear his voice and he theirs. He walked up the central path between the headstones in the unhurried gait of a man approaching a desk. At the obelisk, by the bronze cauldron, stood Peter Pettigrew, who Harry had killed 9 months earlier in a back staircase of Gryffindor Tower, and who was, accordingly, not the man at the cauldron. The man at the cauldron was a man wearing Peter Pettigrew's body, the way a man wears a borrowed suit, and the body in the lamplight off the cauldron was a body that had been animated by something other than the man who had built it. Harry registered this in 2.5 seconds and filed it. Microchip 2 days earlier had said into the burner phone the words, "I cannot account, Frankie, for the fact that he is at the cauldron," and Frank had said, "We will work it out at the gate," and Harry, listening on the extension, had said, "He is a piece on the board that someone else has put there. We will move on him as we find him." Sirius, on the southern perimeter, had said nothing. 12 men in dark robes stood in a wide ring around the obelisk, hooded, their faces shadowed, their hands held at their sides in the parade rest of men who had been told to wait. Harry counted 12 and made it 13, because the 13th was off to the right of the obelisk on a small stone bench sitting, and the 13th on the small stone bench was not in a Death Eater robe but in a dark traveling cloak, and the 13th, when Harry's eyes touched him, inclined his head a fraction. Harry, in the long grass at the southern gate, did not incline his head back. Harry filed the 13th and moved on. Severus Snape on the bench did not move. In the cauldron, on the surface of a substance that was not water and was not blood and was, in the careful judgment of Eileen Travers, a regenerative draught compounded of 7 ingredients, 6 of which she had named and the 7th of which she would not, a small thin shape stirred. The shape was the size of a newborn child. It had limbs. It had a head. It had on the head a face that was no face. It opened as Harry approached the obelisk, 2 red eyes. "Mr. Castle," the thing in the cauldron said in a voice that was high and thin and sibilant, and which Harry in the lamplight registered as identical to the voice he had heard 9 months earlier in a corridor on the 3rd floor of a Scottish school, coming from the back of a man's head under a turban. "You are punctual, sir," Harry said. "You are also, I am told, expected to die in the next 90 seconds. You will forgive me, Mr. Castle, if I do not stand." "Of course, sir." The thing in the cauldron looked at him out of the red eyes. The hooded men in the ring had not moved. The man in Peter Pettigrew's body by the cauldron held a long silver knife. In Harry's left ear, in the false ear of his collar, Frank Castle said very quietly the words, "I have you." In Harry's left ear, Sirius Black said the words, "Southern perimeter clear." In Harry's left ear, Microchip said the words, "12 Death Eaters on thermal." 13th signature at the bench reading as Snape, which is consistent with the briefing. The cauldron is reading at a temperature that means the resurrection is in stage 2 of 4. You have a window of 3 minutes before stage 3. Stage 3 is when the wraith reattaches to a flesh body. Hold the conversation. Frank moves at the headshot. You move at the rifle report. We are go on your word. Harry, in his left ear, with no movement of his lips that anyone in the graveyard could see, said the word ready. Frank, in his left ear, said the word 3. The wind at the top of the hill dropped to 2 miles per hour. Frank said the word 2. Harry, aloud, with the small polite smile that did not, with the thing in the cauldron, reach the eyes, said, "Sir, before we begin, I should tell you that, on the night of the 31st of October 1981, when you came to a house in Godric's Hollow and killed my mother and my father in front of me, you did not, sir, only fail to kill me. You also, sir, made an oversight. The oversight was that you did not come back." The red eyes in the cauldron narrowed. "Mr. Castle, you are clever. Do not on the last night of your life be unwise." Frank said the word 1. The shot came. It came as the small thin crack of a heavy round breaking the sound barrier at half the distance to the obelisk, and as, 3/4 of a second behind it, the sound of the report from the rifle. It came through the long summer dusk over 600 yards of yew trees and ferns, and over the stone wall of the graveyard, and into the bronze cauldron at the precise angle of 43 degrees, off the horizontal that Frank had calculated and recalculated 4 times in the preceding hour. And the round, treated by Eileen Travers for the head and not for the chest, struck the small thin shape in the cauldron through the upper plate of the skull behind the no-face and exited through the soft palate and went through the cauldron's bronze base and into the wet earth 6 inches below, where, for many years after, the grass would not grow in the shape of a clean round hole. The thing in the cauldron made a noise that was not a noise. The thing in the cauldron, which had not in its prior existences been killed by a rifle round through the head, did the thing it had been designed to do under such conditions, which was to disperse. The wraith rose out of the cauldron. The wraith was thin, the wraith was screaming. The wraith was, in the calculation of the round Eileen Travers had treated, going to be screaming for a very long time, because the substance with which she had treated the round was a substance that adhered in the manner of cold tar to the smoke form of the dispersing wraith, and would not in any reasonable span of years allow the wraith to reattach to a body. Harry was already moving. Harry was, in the moment of the report, already drawing the PPK from inside his coat. Harry was, in the second of the moving, already on the line of approach he had walked in his head 50 times in the preceding week. The hooded men in the ring registered the report at 1/2 second. The hooded men registered the wraith at 1 second. The hooded men in the second of the registering were already drawing wands. The hooded men were at that point in the calculation of Microchip and Frank and Harry and Eileen Travers and Quinn and Sirius Black dead men. Harry shot the hooded man at his 10 o'clock twice in the chest at 12 feet. The hooded man went down. Harry shot the hooded man at his 2 o'clock twice in the chest at 14 feet. The hooded man went down. Harry moved laterally to his left, behind the cover of a tall headstone of a man who had died in 1834, and from the cover of which he shot the hooded man at his 9 o'clock twice in the chest at 20 feet. The hooded man went down. The 4 other hooded men on Harry's side of the obelisk had by the third drop oriented on him and were lifting wands. Harry was already moving. Harry was already, by the time the wands came up, behind a second headstone 12 feet further to his left. The first curse from the hooded men struck the headstone behind which Harry had been standing 2 seconds earlier, and the headstone exploded into a small white cloud of pulverized limestone. The second curse from the hooded men passed through the small white cloud and struck the wall of the graveyard at chest height 8 feet to Harry's left. Frank in the long grass at 800 yards worked the bolt. Frank put the second round through the chest of the hooded man at the obelisk's 2 o'clock, who had been turning to look at the bench where Severus Snape was in the small parade rest of a man waiting for an instruction sitting. The hooded man went down. Frank worked the bolt. Frank put the third round through the chest of the hooded man at the obelisk's 4 o'clock, who had been raising a wand at Harry. That hooded man went down. Frank worked the bolt. He had been firing once every 2.5 seconds. On account Microchip had drilled into him over 14 weeks the previous winter on a range in upstate New York. He intended, on the count, to be empty of the magazine in 22 seconds, and to be on the second magazine in 26. Harry, behind the second headstone, drew the holly wand with the left hand and the PPK still in the right. He aimed the holly wand at the bronze cauldron itself, on the line of fire he had not, in this moment, been told to take. He spoke the word that Eileen Travers had taught him in the apartment on Astoria Boulevard the previous April, in the small kitchen with the 3 cats, and which was a word in a language that was older than English and which had been used, in its first written record, by a Welsh monk in a manuscript dated 1117, and the word which was a word of unmaking. When spoken by a wand of holly and phoenix feather in the hand of a 14-year-old boy with green eyes who had been preparing for this moment for 9 years, struck the bronze cauldron at the obelisk's base. The cauldron came apart at the seams. The substance in the cauldron, which had been the substance of a resurrection ritual, sprayed across the foot of the obelisk in a thin steaming arc, and the arc, on contact with the small fragmented thing that the rifle round had left in the bottom of the cauldron, ignited. The flame was the color of green river ice. The flame burned what was in the cauldron in 11 seconds, and at the end of the 11 seconds there was nothing in the bronze. In the upper air above the obelisk, the wraith that had been the Dark Lord was a thin and dispersing screaming, and the screaming in the next 40 seconds would attenuate, and the attenuation, on the careful calculation of Eileen Travers, would not allow the wraith to reattach in any form to any body in the next 24 years. And even after the 24 years, the calculation suggested, the attaching would not be the same wraith but a smaller and more wounded wraith, which would, in its smaller and more wounded form, be very much easier to kill the second time. The hooded men in the ring had registered the cauldron's destruction at 2 seconds. The hooded men on the registration had begun to scatter. The hooded men were of 2 minds, half on the calculation of who was being killed and from where ran in the direction of the southern gate where they intended to apparate out. The other half on the calculation of who had killed the cauldron ran in the direction of Harry, with wands raised in the manner of men whose only remaining purpose in the closing of an arc of 14 years was to kill the boy at the second headstone. Harry, behind the second headstone, reloaded the PPK with a fresh magazine and moved. He moved up the slope of the graveyard from headstone to headstone, the way Rustam had taught him to move up a hill, the way Quinn had taught him to move down a corridor, the way Frank had taught him to move across a room. He did not run between the headstones. He did not bound. He stepped between each in 2 short controlled strides with the body bladed and the weapon up in the eye on the next piece of cover. He shot the first hooded man who came up the slope toward him twice in the chest at 14 feet. He shot the second hooded man twice in the chest at 16 feet. He shot the third hooded man who had drawn his hood off in the act of casting and who was therefore identifiable as the senior crab whose son was in Slytherin and whose face Harry had seen at the August reception at the Malfoy estate the previous summer, twice in the chest at 22 feet. The fourth hooded man who had on the death of the third decided to apparate and was beginning the spin on his heel was shot by Frank Castle from 800 yards. In the bronze cauldron seconds it had taken him to work the bolt and receipt through the upper sternum 1 round before he could complete the rotation. The man's apparition collapsed and he went down at the foot of the obelisk. In Harry's left ear, Microchip's voice, very calm, very precise, 5 down on the slope, 4 down at the obelisk, 3 on a run for the gate, Sirius is on the gate. In Harry's left ear, Sirius's voice, very calm, very dry, I have the gate, Harry. The 3 hooded men at the gate ran. Sirius Black, who had been in his earlier life the second best duelist of his class at Hogwarts, and who had not in 12 years in Azkaban lost what he had been, met them at the wrought iron arch in the form of a black dog the size of a small horse, and put 2 of them on the ground in the first 3 seconds with a maneuver involving the rear of the third's knee and the front of the second's throat. And stunned the third with a curse spoken in the form of the dog by a maneuver of magic that the careful calculation of the official Auror's manual had, for 12 years, said was not possible. The third hooded man, who had been the youngest Carrow brother, slumped against the wrought iron arch. Sirius, in the form of the dog, sat on him. In Harry's left ear, Sirius said 3 at the gate. In Harry's left ear, Microchip said 12 down, 1 on the bench. The 13th has not moved. Harry, at the foot of the obelisk in the lee of the granite, looked at the bench. Severus Snape, on the bench in the small parade rest of a man waiting for an instruction, looked back at him. Harry, in the long lamplight off the cauldron's smoking ruins, with the PPK still in his hand and the holly wand in his other, walked toward the bench. He did not raise the PPK. He held it instead at the low ready in the manner Quinn had taught him to hold a knife in a room where the negotiation had not yet concluded. He stopped 6 feet from the bench. Professor, Mr. Castle, you did not move. I did not, Mr. Castle. I had been told to remain at the bench in the role of a man who had not been told otherwise until you instructed me to do otherwise. By whom were you told? By the headmaster, Mr. Castle, in a long letter delivered to me on the morning of the 20th of April. And the role. The role, Mr. Castle, was that of a man who in the eyes of the Dark Lord had been for 13 years in the Dark Lord's service, and who had on the night of the resurrection been called to the graveyard in the proper form, and who had in the proper form come. You are not, Professor, in the Dark Lord's service. I am not, Mr. Castle, and I have not been in the proper accounting of the matter since the night of the 31st of October 1981. You knew the Wraith would die tonight. I knew, Mr. Castle, that the Wraith would die tonight or that I would die tonight and that in either case my role on this bench would end. You have a list, Professor. Snape on the bench in the long lamplight off the ruined cauldron reached, with no movement that could not be observed by the boy with the gun at 6 feet, into the inside pocket of his cloak and drew out a small folded square of parchment and extended it across the air between them. Harry with the holly wand hand took the parchment. He did not in the moment of taking open it. Names, Snape said. How many? 43, Mr. Castle. Some of them are dead, some of them are dying. Some of them are at large. Some of them are in positions in the Ministry of Magic from which they will, in the absence of the Wraith, attempt over the next decade to recover. They will in the next decade fail if your stepfather and I and the boy who is in front of me are sufficiently patient. I have on the parchment the addresses, the connections, the financial dependencies, the affairs, the failings, the patterns. I have on the parchment everything I have had on my conscience to carry for 13 years in the role of a man who was on the bench. Harry looked at the parchment in his hand. Professor. Yes. Thank you. Do not thank me, Mr. Castle. I will not. You will not, on returning to the school in the morning, mention me. I will not. Harry put the parchment into the inside of his coat. He looked one last time at the professor on the bench. He inclined his head. Snape inclined his back. Harry walked away. In Harry's left ear, Frank said the words 18 on the watch. Harry came down the slope of the graveyard between the headstones. He stepped over the body of the hooded man at his 2 o'clock. He stepped over the body of the hooded man at his 10. He passed the broken bronze of the cauldron at the obelisk's foot and the small wet circle in the earth 6 inches below where the round had come to rest, and the long smear of green flame that had, in 11 seconds, consumed the substance the cauldron had held. He came to the gate. He inclined his head to the black dog on the third carrow. The black dog raised its eyes to him and did not, on the inclining, move from its position. "Serious?" The dog blinked. "I will see you in the autumn." The dog blinked. He went through the gate. He walked down the slope of the hill in the long blue dusk, away from the graveyard, along a small rutted track that joined the road at the bottom of the hill at a Y-shaped junction, where a black Vauxhall hatchback microchip had hired in London the previous Tuesday was waiting in the lay-by with its lights off and its engine ticking down. He got into the car. He took off the coat. He folded the coat across his lap. He took out the PPK. He cleared the chamber. He ejected the magazine. He laid the weapon on the folded coat. He sat. He waited. Frank came down from the long grass 12 minutes later. He had broken down the AWM into its 3 components in the bag he had brought it in, and the suppressor was wrapped separately in a chamois, and the bipod was folded and the bag was zipped. He set the bag in the back of the Vauxhall. He got into the driver's seat. He looked at the boy on the passenger side. "You all right?" "Yes, Frank, you hit. Number, you did good." "Yes, Frank." Frank started the engine. The Vauxhall pulled out of the lay-by. The lights 50 yards down the road came on. In the back seat, in the form of a black dog, Sirius Black, who had come down off the hill 90 seconds behind Frank, lay on the seat with his head between his paws, and the dog's ears on the second mile twitched once at a small sound and then settled. They stopped at a service station off the A1 at 2:14 in the morning. Frank went in. Frank came back. He had a coffee. He had a Coke. He had 2 ham sandwiches. He passed the Coke to Harry. He passed one of the sandwiches to the black dog in the back, who lifted his head at the smell, and who, after a moment's reflection, became, on the back seat, a man. Sirius unwrapped the sandwich. Sirius ate the sandwich in the manner of a man who had in the previous half-hour run several miles in the form of a dog. "Frank," Sirius said around the bread. "Mr. Black, I owe you a long talk." "I owe you one too, sir." "Not tonight." "No, sir, not tonight. In the autumn, perhaps." "In the autumn, sir." Sirius finished the sandwich. He looked at the boy in the passenger seat. The boy was drinking the Coke slowly, in the small careful sips of a person who has not been allowed sweets often. "Harry." "Yes, Sirius. In the autumn I think I will come to the school." "Yes, Sirius. And we will sit in Hogsmeade in the back of the Hogshead, you and me. And the conversation will be the conversation I should have had with your father when he was 15, about girls and about the future and about the small unwise things one does when one is 15. Harry inclined his head. "Yes, Sirius, you will by then perhaps be willing to have such a conversation." "I will try, Sirius." "Good." The Vauxhall reached London at 5:11 in the morning. Frank dropped Sirius at the front of a house in Grimald Place that had been, the previous spring, in a state of disrepair and which was, in the long blue dawn, beginning to be restored. Sirius got out. Sirius stood by the open passenger door looking down at the boy. "Harry." "Yes." "I will see you in the autumn." "Yes." He shut the door. The Vauxhall pulled away. Frank, on the corner, glanced once into the rearview mirror. Sirius was standing in the street watching them go. Frank, in the mirror, inclined his head a fraction. Sirius, in the mirror, inclined his back. They drove out to a small private airfield in Surrey that Microchip had arranged. They drove through the perimeter fence at 6:03, past a security guard who had been paid the previous evening and had, on the agreement, been instructed to be in the toilet for the 8 minutes of their passage. They parked beside a small twin-engine plane whose pilot Frank had used on previous occasions in matters not requiring the customs of either country. The pilot, who was named Hopkins, came down the steps with a clipboard and a thermos. "Mr. Castle." "Hopkins." "This is the kid. He is staying. He is going back to school. You are taking me to Reykjavik. From Reykjavik I will go on my own arrangement to a city in the eastern United States in which I will, in the next 36 hours, be unremarkable." "Yes, sir." Hopkins took the duffel bag from the rear seat. He carried it to the plane. Frank turned in the morning to the boy. He took the boy's face very gently in his 2 hands. He did not bend down. The boy was nearly his own height. He looked at the boy in the eye in the long blue dawn in a small airfield in Surrey, 2 hours after the Wraith had been killed and the cauldron broken and the 13 names on the parchment that Snape had handed over had been put in Harry's pocket. "Listen to me. Yes, Frank, you are going back to school. You are going to finish the year. You are going to take the exams." You are going to be polite to the staff, you are going to write to Hermione, you are going to write to Sirius, you are going to write to me every week in the code, you are going to read the parchment. You are going to send microchip what you find on the parchment line by line with your own assessment. You are going to wait, you are going to be patient, you are going to be good. Yes, Frank, there are more names, there will be more names for a long time. You and I have between us work that will take years. We will do the work. We will do the work as we have done it. We will not be hurried. We will not be hasty. We will not move on a man before we have made sure you hear me. Yes, Frank. And in the summers, yes, you come home, yes, to the apartment, yes, to microchip to the kitchen. The chest sat on the windowsill beside the soldier with the broken arm and the small black and white dog with one ear missing. Yes, Frank. Frank looked at him for a long moment in the long blue dawn. You are good, son. Yes, Frank, I am proud of you. The boy in the early light in the small private airfield in Surrey looked up at the man who had taken him out of a cupboard 9 years before. He did not then or after name the thing that moved in him at the words. He inclined his head once. He held it inclined for half a beat longer than the inclining required. He stepped back. Frank turned. He walked to the plane. He climbed the small steps. He did not, at the top of the steps, look back. The door of the plane closed. The engines spooled up. The plane taxied to the end of the short runway, turned, accelerated, and lifted off the grass at 6:14 in the morning into a sky that was, by that hour, the color of a sheet of clean paper. Harry Castle stood on the small concrete apron of the airfield with the dark coat folded over his arm and the small folded parchment in his pocket, and he watched the plane until it was a small dot in the southwest, and then he watched the place where the dot had been for another quarter of a minute. And then he turned and walked to the Vauxhall, in which Microchip's man in London who had driven down at 5 was waiting to take him north. The Vauxhall took him to King's Cross. From King's Cross, he took the 7:52 to Edinburgh. From Edinburgh he took the Hogwarts Express, which had been arranged by the headmaster to leave at noon half empty, with 2 compartments cleared at the back for the boy who had been gone overnight on private business. He sat alone in a compartment. He read a book on the small careful chemistry of human anatomy that Quinn had given him at Easter. He ate a sandwich Microchip's man had pressed into his hand at the station. He arrived at Hogsmeade Station at 6:11 in the evening. He took the path up to the castle. He came in the front doors at 6:38. He came into the great hall, where dinner was being served and where the 4 house tables were 3/4 full and where a small composed girl with bushy brown hair at the Gryffindor table looked up at the door the moment he stepped through it. The hall fell quiet. Harry walked the length of the hall to the Slytherin table. He sat in his place. He took a roll of bread from the basket. He buttered it. He began to eat. At the staff table the headmaster looked at him for a long, long moment. The headmaster on the long look inclined his head a fraction. Harry at the Slytherin table inclined his back. The 2 inclinings took perhaps half a second. The hall, on its second half-second of quiet, began to resume its noise. Hermione at the Gryffindor table set down her fork. She did not, in front of the hall, come over. She caught his eye across the gap between the tables, and she held the eye for a count of 3, and she gave him with the smallest motion of her mouth the small composed nod of a person who has just confirmed, on a chart she has been carrying for 10 months, that the small black mark she had drawn against a particular entry could now be ruled clean. He inclined his head to her. Severus Snape at the staff table did not look up from his plate. Across the table, Draco Malfoy looked at him with an expression that contained in equal parts the calculation of a Malfoy in the morning of a great and unwelcome change of the political weather, and the small unsteady fear of a boy whose father had not, this morning, returned from a place his father had said he was going. The boy did not on the meeting of their eyes speak. The boy looked instead at his plate. Harry ate his roll. He took a piece of chicken. He took a small portion of mashed potato. He drank a glass of water. He did not, on the meal, speak to anyone at the table. When the meal was finished, he stood. He walked the length of the hall in the same unhurried gait in which he had walked in. He did not look at the staff table. He did not look at the Gryffindor table. He went out of the hall. He went down the staircase to the dungeon. He went into the Slytherin common room, which was empty at that hour. He went into the 4th-year boys' dormitory, which was empty at that hour. He sat on the edge of his bed. He took from his inside pocket the small folded square of parchment that Severus Snape had handed him at the bench in the lamplight off the broken cauldron. He opened it. He read the 43 names slowly, in the small careful order in which they had been writ, with the addresses and the connections and the small ledger of each man's particular sins, and he memorized the first 12, and he folded the parchment again and he placed it under the loose floorboard he had identified in his first week of the first year behind his trunk and beneath the 3rd board from the wall. He put on his pajamas. He climbed into the bed. He drew the curtains. He lay on his back. He looked at the canopy, he listened to his breathing. He thought of Frank halfway across an ocean in a small twin-engine plane. He thought of Microchip in the apartment on West 47th Street at midnight in his time making coffee. He thought of Sirius in the house in Grimald Place with the windows finally clean. He thought of Quinn in the cottage above the rocky beach in Belfast with the kettle on. He thought of Eileen Travers on Astoria Boulevard with the 3 cats. He thought of the chart on the wall in the apartment. He thought of the list of names. He thought of the small black mark Microchip would, that morning in his time, draw through the name Tom M. Riddle on the chart. He thought of the next name on the chart which Microchip had not yet drawn a mark beside. He had one fewer name to think of than he had had this morning. The named emotion that crossed his face in the long quiet of the 4-poster was satisfaction. He recognized it the way Frank at the bottom of a service station coffee had recognized stillness. He sat with it. He did not look away. He slept. Outside on the grounds of the school on the long lawn between the castle and the lake, a small wind moved across the grass. The wind came from the southwest at 3 miles per hour with a small variable gust every 40 seconds. The wind carried from the village below the small clean sounds of a country at peace. In a small private airfield in Surrey at the same hour the grass was empty. Frank Castle was, by then, 14,000 feet over the North Sea with the long blue dawn behind him going home. Chapter 6 End.